Hello and welcome to whatever this is going to be called. I don't really have a name. I think somebody's just going to have something that's like, yes, take that easy when it comes to like whatever podcast this ends up being. But to sort of get to the meat and bones of it, me and Deathy from TF2 Boomers, everybody knows who Deathy is because he's making everybody hate Shiv for 2 weeks and now probably going to do the same with Warden / Mirage. So there's that. You don't reckon?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I think Warden's, honestly, I don't actually think Warden's broken.
Well, we got the thing with Shiv is it was
like the thing with Shiv is that like it was clearly like character issue, but with Warden it might just be like that I'm actually pretty good at Warden. I think the character is good. But, yeah.
It'd be good fun to get into it because there's also, so basically the whole point of this is there's a lot of really good podcasts out there on Deadlock. But we just want to kind of talk about the patches when they happen, like a couple of days afterwards. So we'd have scrims, we'd have officials. And then as the esports scene starts to develop a little bit more outside of $500 weeklies and stuff, which are great. Genuinely, it's the way to start this. I'm glad that we have that instead of more weird 10K tournaments with big betters attached to it. The more that the esports scene develops, we'll be talking about that a little bit more and kind of what's going on in the scene. And yeah, just talking about the meta of the game now that it's starting to develop to a certain point. So we actually have another patch as well that came out yesterday. And I also wanted to shout out these guys on Deadlock who made this site that actually makes the patch notes really nice to look at. So shout out to, they do have the name at the bottom. Where's it? Dan Mastro. I am going to use your website pretty much throughout all of this because, like I said, it's better than looking on the forums to do it. Sorry, Yoshi. But we have the patch that came out on Thursday. We wanted to do this a little bit earlier, but I'm kind of glad that it got delayed because not only do we have another patch that's come out yesterday, but also we got a good chance to either scrim or play officials, or in your case, especially playing a lot of ranked at the weekend. So I think some of this stuff, like the Hero Labs map changes, just like commends and other like miscellaneous features we'll probably skip over, but out of the 6 characters, because I saw that you played a little bit of Hero Labs, which is looking to be the most broken. Hero Labs
every day, so yeah.
So which ones of the 6 have you actually played?
I think almost yeah, so I've never gotten Fathom or Wrecker, and I've played all of the other ones. No, sorry, I didn't play Calico either. I actually have all of them purpled when I queue, but for some reason I never get Wrecker, Calico, or Fathom. So I should probably just like unpurple Holiday Magician and Viper because I've played those. I think that probably Fathom is the most broken from what I've seen. That character is just like insane. It has Shiv passive for some reason, and it's just like does like 1,000,000 damage. Its weapon is like crazy good. So yeah, that character is definitely getting nerfed a lot. Calico seems also pretty broken. And then Magician and Viper also seem quite broken. And then Wrecker, honestly, all of them seem kind of broken, except Holiday seems to be the worst one of all of them. Probably because the thing with Holiday is that she's actually really broken in lane, but after lane, she kind of seems to fall off. But all the other ones kind of have insane scaling.
Yeah, I mean, you could definitely sort of tell which characters are on the verge of coming out next, as opposed to like much later on.
You've even Wrecker or Magician.
Yeah. They even don't have like cadence and stuff in it yet, and cadence has been in the game a while. They've added in another one as well. One of them that's like a Dota 2 shield as well, I think, right? That there's just a character that's just a big shield, but probably very early on in the stages. It's just a lot of data mining stuff that's in the game. But yeah, so like maybe this is worth talking about like next week in the future where there's a quiet week. But I think considering there's so much stuff here, talking about Hero Labs commands and stuff, even like the graphical changes and stuff like Flog getting new animations, some like clarity. I think with a lot of this stuff, it's all quality of life. It's all nice. There's not necessarily something that's going to be worth discussing. It's just, yeah, this is cool to have in the game.
It's all positive. It's like at the end of the day, there's nothing interesting to talk about because it's just like, yeah, these are good changes. They're like, that's all good.
Yeah, it's a very seems good. Like nobody's going to talk about the flashes on the Windows taskbar being bad when you're about to spawn, right?
Yeah.
The only issue about this, I think, is some of the ordering's a bit weird, but I think like some of the stuff in here is also very simple and straightforward. You've got like the tracking changes with Yamata's Flying Strike and Kill and Blow, stuff with like co-op bot matches. I think the main thing that might be worth starting on is the changes to like AP no longer being granted by walkers and not having like basically less bounties attached to objectives and more just as you naturally level along in the game, which I think is something that the devs have naturally scaled back over time. Like you would get ability point bounties for taking a Guardian. That's no longer the case. Now you don't get it for walkers. Just kind of feel like it's that natural bottleneck that happens late game where if you have one walker and they have all of yours, those free ability points can go a long way in the right hands, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think there's two things that are interesting about that. Well, first of all, they're obviously trying to make it so that it's harder to like super snowball the game. Because like before, let's say that you got an early lead, you took like, okay, so originally Guardians gave AP, like lane Guardians. So like that was like super snowbally. You would take the lane Guardians. If you had all 4 lane Guardians and the enemy team had 0, the game was basically won because you would have like a, 24 AP advantage because it would give 1 AP to everyone on your team per Guardian. So it was just like an insane advantage early on, especially. So they removed that. And then they made it so that you got AP at a certain souls level, and then now they're doing that with walkers, they're doing that with the shrine/patron, so they're doing that with everything. And that does two things. Is one, it's like helps prevent the snowball a little bit because it makes it feel like there's alternatives. So even if you lose all your walkers, if you got like good farm while that was happening, like if you're able to split push, get waves, get their jungle, get other resources, you might not actually be that far behind as long as you were able to like maintain in souls. Like if you got the urn, for example, because before the kind of trade off between the urn and the walkers was like, okay, the urn gives you, let's say early on, let's say the urn gives you 4 or 5k souls for the team. A walker gives you about 4k souls, except the walker gave you 6 AP, whereas the urn only gave you 1. So it's like, might as well get the walker, you know, because it also like frees up the lane, allows you to push or whatever. So the urn like didn't feel that extremely important, whereas now it feels a lot more important because those souls will help you everyone AP.
Yeah, is there a bit of a not a problem, but I think the thing that the devs have tried to consistently do with like laning changes and the like is cut down on snowbally games. But I don't know if it's a bit of a bad thing to try and like artificially make games that should be stomps a little longer. You know what I mean? Like, because then when you get into like late games, like I casted a little bit of the Grit and Glory on for Friday night, I think it was. And at a point, it was 8 out of the 10 players in the lobby had saw rebirths, and fights just went on for so long. And it's getting to like the 50-minute mark, which is crazy long for like a coordinated like game. And you're sat there thinking, like, is it really that interesting that this game has gone on so long? And that's the only thing I get a little bit concerned about is like, sure, the game could be super snowbally and there wasn't really great comeback mechanics in it. But also at the same time, if you just lose all 4 of your lanes individually, should you just lose basically off of that is my point. Because I think making the game artificially longer doesn't therefore make it more fun to play.
Right. I guess my counter argument to that is that it doesn't necessarily feel that way because on the counter hand, what they've also done is that, and this is later in the patch notes, but they've basically made it so it's just easier to kill walkers and stuff like that. So when you get to a certain point, if you like win a fight or whatever, like you actually will just like red. Like let's say that you win a fight at like 15 minutes, like you can easily get 2 walkers because the walkers just like die instantly now. They just like actually get melted. So, and I haven't noticed my games actually being longer at all. I would say that what I've noticed is that there is a little bit more chance for comeback but overall, the like game-ending scenarios are still the same, and they still happen fairly quickly. It's just that you're not as guaranteed to win if you stomp early, but if you win every lane, you're still going to win quickly, realistically.
Yeah, I think it's also just an element of people getting better at the game. Like, it does feel like I mean, it's anecdotal, I guess, for people that are watching, but when they're playing ranked, how often the games just feel like we could have won this a lot faster. Like, it happens to me all of the time because I just think people don't know how to finish a game. Like, they can get all of the objectives and sort of play macro, split push and the like, but as soon as you get those like 4 walkers and maybe even a shrine, teams find it very difficult to find a pick, find an opening without just relying on mid boss or playing around the urn. And I think for like lower ranks that are trying to work out how the game works, that's probably going to be even worse, but that's only a problem for now. It's not going to be a problem in a year's time once people kind of know how the flow of the game works. It's the same, I imagine, with stuff like Dota as well, right? Where people, if I started playing and I started playing in like whatever like piss ass lobbies there would be, nobody would really know how we effectively finish the game as efficiently as possible.
Yeah, and that's why like you know, a lot of like lower ranked Deadlock games like take a lot longer. Like I do coaching, and I quite frequently coach people that are Archon or what's the rank after Archon? Oracle.
Yeah.
I've also coached some Phantom players, and it's like the games so often are above 40 minutes just because like they don't just like instantly after a fight go do things that make sense. They kind of like, you know, just go about and do whatever, or they're jungling when they shouldn't be. You know, nobody really knows how to play the game, and the community as a whole hasn't gotten, you know, good enough at the game yet. I guess that's kind of like why I'm here to an extent, is to kind of like try to get the community better as a whole.
Yeah.
So that the games are better for everyone. But another change that I don't think anyone has talked about from the AP changes is this is actually a very hard nerf to like a hard support playstyle. So the only person that I know that plays this support playstyle like really hard is like pure content. If you watch his team, I forget what they're called. They're called the Unknown, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you watch his team, he's always like super poor compared to the rest of his team. And on every character, he'll just build like Divine Barrier, like Rescue Beam, Health Nova, whatever, right? But he's always like extremely poor compared to the rest of his team. And the thing is, before, since you got AP from walkers or whatever, if your team was winning, even though you were poor, you still had some ability points to put into your things. But now, if you're poor, you actually have no AP. Like, you actually have no AP, and it's terrible. Because if you're playing a support character, you want at least AP. Like, you don't really care that much about items, maybe, but you want, like, XP, right? Like, AP is the equivalent to XP in this game. Like, in Dota, you want your support to have some levels. Like, in Dota, there's such a thing as, like, hey, you know, let's let our support get level 6 so that he can use his ult or whatever and be active. In Deadlock, you know, we haven't gotten there yet or whatever, but, like, your support needs some level of farm to get AP now, which before your support could get a lot of AP just if your team was winning.
Yeah. Yeah, I never actually sort of thought of it that way, and just how much of a inflation it is to everybody else, even if you're just doing super poorly on your team, what 4 walkers can realistically do for you. And, you know, especially for peer content, if he's playing stuff like Kelvin, like pretty much every ability point and every tier that you can get in your grenade and your ultimate and your beam, like, is useful.
Yeah, they're all useful. Like, that's where your value is at. So if you can't get those AP points, like, it's tough.
Yeah, I mean,
so yeah, that's
an interesting one. But everything else, like, so the ability points you get redistributed, kind of like it was with the Guardians, of just you'll get them along the way as you level up. They've made it a little bit better to deal with people denying when it comes to like higher like latency buffers and stuff like that, which is nice. Again, not much to talk about there. It's just net buff for everybody, unless you are a fiend at stealing people's souls and stuff like that. Also, more soul amounts attached to the actual kill as opposed to picking up the orb, which is again kind of nice. I really like that the breakable spawn times have increased, because seeing Vegas do like the Amazon delivery driver builds was a little bit much. I love having stuff like the boxes and the statues in the game just to give you something to do and stuff to find, and the sort of skill curve, I suppose, of tracking that kind of stuff as well. Like you'll see people type in chat like, okay, the box is in the like fire department building on yellow is going to be up at this time.
Yeah,
it's nice to sort of see that kind of stuff, but I think just every amount of time, like just the amount of time that you could get these up was a little bit silly, I think, especially with like camps being a lot earlier too now.
Yeah, exactly. It's just, I think it was fine before, but it's just with everything having gotten scaled differently, like the boxes just felt a little weird. So I think that going back to 3 minutes makes sense, and they also felt like the rewards were a little high, so they reduced the rewards a little bit. So overall, that was a overall good change. It's still good to do boxes and lane if you don't have anything else to do, but the mechanic is just like a little bit less crazy.
So yeah, this has all of the earn stuff, which I think is its own discussion anyway. So we might as well like eat the frog and start with that realistically. First and foremost, like the earn comeback properties that's going to come in, all we're going to talk about says here that it's an 8% net worth lead for this to happen. This was something that was changed yesterday. It's now 10%, which thank God, trying to work out what 8% of 160k souls was in any given moment and seeing if that was enough was a bit of a nightmare. Now, it still can be a bit of a nightmare. I'm not necessarily too fond of how they've approached this, but I think it's for a multitude of reasons. But I do like it's just 10% now instead of 8% net worth. But the general main brunt of it, I suppose, is that if you are in the lead, then you have to drop off the earn on the opponent's side of the map. And if you are far behind, you can drop off the earn on your side of the map. And so if it's neutral, it stays in the direction it was. I like this. I think some of the places where you have to put the earns are not really built equally.
Yeah, for sure.
The thing that I don't like about it is there are too many like interactions and rules put on top of the earn now. And I think if I think of other objectives in MOBAs, I'm not a MOBA person, but I think of like something that Heroes of the Storm did well with its like in-game objectives that it had around each of the maps that were almost synergistic with just playing the MOBA way, like supplementary, right? If you do well on the objectives around the map, you should win the game. And so the thing I like about it with Heroes of the Storm is it was always incredibly simple and straightforward to understand what those objectives were. And now with the earn, it is just a capture the flag almost mechanic, but with the whole you show up on the map after 30 seconds, you start taking ticking damage after 30 seconds. If you drop the earn, you can't pick it up for 12 seconds. You can use some abilities, but not others, because you can cheese it by burrowing or ice pathing or even Visca/Ivy ulting if you can get that right. It does feel like there's just way too much earn stuff stacked on top of each other at the moment that makes it just not fun to deal with as an objective. Even if you're behind and you want to grab it, there's still just so much like BS that's attached to it now that make it incredibly complicated for players to even know everything that's going on.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that like 99% of the player base doesn't know everything about the earn. There's like a ton of hidden information that's just been sprinkled in patch notes like in the past like 3 months or whatever. Like, you know, people for a long time didn't even know that there was a comeback mechanic to the earn. This isn't new, by the way. There's been a comeback mechanic to the earn for like 2 months. The movement speed, and it gives more souls when you're behind.
Yeah.
So like that's just not stuff that's like Valve has always struggled with information clarity, like just kind of showing a mechanic and explaining everything that it does. Like in Dota, for example, that has always been an issue with like just clarity, visual clarity, like making sure that things are obvious in what they do. And sometimes like tooltips in Dota or ability descriptions were just wrong. And the same is true for Deadlock. There are ability descriptions that are wrong, but also the urn is not like explained thoroughly with all of its abilities. And the other thing with the urn is that they made it a percent net worth, which I feel like doesn't take into account a lot of things. Like 10% might seem like a lot, but let's say that you're at 10 minutes. Teams at 10 minutes usually have around 50k net worth. So if one team has 50k and the other team has 55k, that's enough of a lead in order for the urn to activate. And basically, if you're only 5k ahead at 10 minutes, taking a fight where the enemy team has to turn in the urn, when they're behind, is like really hard because it's a quite disadvantageous spot to take a fight in, especially early. And so it kind of feels like if you're the team that's ahead 10%, you kind of need to just grab the urn, but you can't actually turn it in. Like, it's just not really possible early on because the fight is just too hard. For like a 5k lead at 10 minutes, for example. So I would personally like to see the percent lead like changed throughout the game. I was talking about this with Megatree yesterday. It's like, I don't think it should be 10% for the first urn. I think for the first urn, it should be like, maybe 20%.
Yeah. There's the other side of it too, where it's like, it's whatever percentage it is when it is first picked up. So say, for example, if me and Deathy are, we're colored like amber and sapphire. So let's say I'm 5k souls ahead of Deathy. So I'm over that 10% marker now, and I try and pick up the urn. It would show up on like his side of the map that I would have to go and drop it off here. However, if Deathy says takes a couple of walkers, wins a big team fight, just does a lot of objectives, and then he's ahead in souls, after a couple of minutes, the urn spot will still have to be dropped on his side of the map up until the urn either gets like completed or it resets on that 15-minute mark. And this was something that kind of like screwed us in an official this weekend as well, right? Where like we were ahead, we picked up the urn, we didn't realize that there was that disparity, and we're like, oh shit, we have to drop it off next to two walkers, basically. And we were only a smidgen ahead. By the time that they did the urn, they were in the lead before they had already sort of taken the urn away from us. So it's definitely one of those mechanics that if people don't know everything about it, which they don't, kind of like you said, especially newer players, they don't realize this kind of stuff. What should be a comeback mechanic that is heavily leaning towards them succeeding might end up sort of kicking them in the ass a little bit. And the fact that it's happening, it happened to, I mentioned peer content again, happened to Unknown's team as well this weekend. I saw it, and it's probably going to happen a little bit this upcoming week with stuff where it just shafts team, especially super early on in the game. I think as well with the urn, one thing that I'm not too sure on, that I'd love your opinion on, or just people are watching, I don't know if I like the fact that it just hard resets 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 minutes. And that there's no, once the urn is done, then it goes on cooldown for 5 minutes. You know what I mean? You could go and put down an urn at 14 minutes and 45 on the clock. 15 seconds later, another urn's available. And I think that's, considering everything else with like mid bosses and stuff, I don't know why they have that still. Like, wouldn't they just have it so once you've completed an urn, the 5 minute mark after that is when it becomes available again? And then you again have the whole, like, you're tracking mid boss timings, you're tracking urn timings and stuff like that. That feels a little bit fairer, because I think trying to do, potentially being able to do two urns very quickly in quick succession is only going to make that side of the game a little bit worse. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I see your point. I don't think that it's ever happened in a game of mine in my, like, whatever, 1,000 Deadlock games where someone's actually able to do two urns in succession without, the enemy team being able to counter. So I think that's not really a huge issue, and it's probably extremely niche scenario that happens only in like very, very specific situations. I think that the biggest reason why it is the way that it is right now is that Deadlock has one issue right now, which is that because of the nature of jungle camps in Deadlock, so the fastest jungle camp in Deadlock takes 4 minutes to respawn. If you compare that to Dota, in Dota, jungle camps respawn on the minute, always. So they don't have a timer specifically, actually. So if you didn't know this, Ryan, basically, jungle always respawns at 0-0 in Dota every minute.
Okay.
So if you kill the jungle camp at 59, and you move away, it'll respawn instantly. So you can farm it twice. And this is also how stacking works. So you can stack a jungle camp by pulling it out of its zone, and then another one will respawn, and then you'll have 2 jungle camps in one area, so your carry can farm it later. Right. That's how it works in Dota. But basically, in Deadlock, the fastest jungle camp respawns 4 minutes, and then the medium jungle camp is 6 minutes, and then the large jungle camp I think is 8 minutes. Or I might be wrong on those numbers, but it's somewhere around there.
Yeah.
And so because of that, once all of the jungle has been farmed, if both teams are even, you kind of end up in a situation where the only objective on the map is mid boss, but neither team's just gonna go like kill mid boss if the game is even, right? So it's just kind of a stalemate, and nothing really happens because neither team has a reason to take a risk to fight. So both teams are just gonna kind of try to push waves and just like see if they can get a pick. There's going to be a little bit of push and pull, but you'll see this kind of stalemate scenario create itself. And I think as teams become more even in skill and like competitive, we'll see this much better. We'll see this much more often. I think right now we don't see this that much because there tends to be like a significant skill disparity between the teams.
Yeah.
But it will be an issue. So if you make the urn have a cooldown, then you would have an even longer period of time where there's potentially nothing, because it would just be kind of awkward. Like at least now there's the urn, it kind of helps bridge that gap at the moment.
Yeah, and I mean you got the bridge buffs attached to them too, I guess, which same sort of thing. Like for them, I don't mind them showing every 5 minutes, but it's interesting that they've gone that direction with the urn, and like I think it's the one part of the game that they haven't quite worked out what they want to do with it. Like there's been so many changes where you'd have to drop it off into the center of the map. From the center of the map outwards to the sides of it. There's been like a lot of changes here or there to what the impact of an urn is. So I think they're still playing with that. I do really like the idea of like if you are behind, then the urn would spawn on your side of the map. I do think that the ones that are sort of by the tier 3 camp outside are a nightmare. And also the other side of it is like being stunned drops the urn, but getting hard meleeed drops the urn. But if you've had the urn for 90 seconds, you're about to drop in so many melees, you can't pick it up for 12 seconds. And it's just, again, it's like all of these rules that they've added in over time contradicting and clashing into each other a little bit, which you mentioned the thing about like the Dota side of like pulling the camps out so they can respawn on the minute. That's why people went and played League. I think a lot of people just, right? Like, because at least League, it's not as interesting with the amount of depth that it has, but there's a lot more clarity. That's one thing that like Riot can do well, is just being like, this is what this is supposed to do. Whereas for Deadlock, it's a little bit like the fun is finding it out for yourself. But if you're a new player and you're playing up against people that know all of this stuff and nothing is out right there to tell you how to approach it, it's not going to feel great.
Yeah, I do agree. I think that overall they're just experimenting with the urn, and we'll see where it goes. I think that the idea of having it be different when you're behind and having it work as a comeback mechanic is fine. I think right now it's like too easy of a comeback mechanic, to be honest. So like it just feels like when you're ahead, you want to pick up the urn, but like sometimes you can't even turn it in. You just want to hold on to it, because if the enemy team gets it, then it's like, well, fuck, we have to fight there, but like we don't really want to fight there. So yeah.
So
I guess I like the direction in which they're going.
Yeah,
but
same.
I don't think that this fix is perfect. At the same time, I'm sure that they'll iterate on it. And but yeah, right now it feels like I had a game yesterday where I was up 20k at 10 minutes, and we managed to lose it. And we had like some things about comebacks in Deadlock right now. I think something is messed up, and I think that it feels like a little bit possibly too easy to come back now. Before it might have felt a little too hard because of a couple snowball-y elements, but now that they took away the AP from walkers and then they made the urn have this mechanic starting at, initially it was 8%, now it's 10%. Feels like it might be
you almost
much.
don't want to be in the lead coming out of laning phase. Like
honestly, if it's even, but you have like one person that's like a raid boss, it's actually kind of better. Because you're like, okay, we have a raid boss we can fight. They can't really fight us because we've got like this guy that's like super farmed. So like we're fine taking the fight, but the overall net worth is even, so we can just get this urn and deposit it in the normal spot, and they can't fight us because we have this guy who's super farmed.
Yeah, it's
and also the guy who's super farmed has a bunch of AP as well that he wouldn't have had before.
Yeah, that's also true. So you're even stronger when you're up early because you're not waiting to do a solo or walker in order to get up to that like next echelon of strength. But yeah, I think Urn's probably the part of the game that just it's not the worst part of it, but I think it's just the thing that needs adjusting the most, which is why I don't mind spending so much time talking about it. But the objectives themselves, like they've changed the ranges where now you need to be on top of the high ground for a guardian, which I kind of like. I don't mind the whole sliding downstairs to get extra ammo, but when I was seeing people do that to destroy guardian, it's again it's a very like Valve thing, I suppose, of just a little bit of tech in order to, if you're not doing that tech, you are just losing your team the game, right? And it's a little bit cheesy.
Losing about 50% damage if you weren't doing that, depending on the characters you played.
So I'm glad that like they didn't take out the mechanic full stop, but they just made it so you can't cheese a guardian by doing it. And also just making guardians and walkers more resistant to troopers and damage, and then having that resistance drop over time to the point where it's much weaker. Like the guardian's been minus 30% weaker resistance wise past 10 minutes. And like even more so as time goes on. Same with the walkers as well, kind of like you said. Seems that they just, maybe the one thing that they didn't want to do was make walkers easier to kill whilst having just power attached to them with ability points. So yeah, I kind of like this. I think it does sort of highlight something that you sort of mentioned with the combat mechanics in the game, where some of these changes in a vacuum are fine, but when you add a lot of these things together, there's so many variables, there's so many changing things. Like, for example, I made some of the more melee close quarter characters a little bit weaker, like Majestic Leap and stuff for Warden was nerfed a lot, so him closing the distance on people was a lot harder, but they made snipers stronger. So it's a little bit like, not only have you made the long range characters better, you've made the close range characters worse. Like Shiv, which needed nerfing, but you get my point of just naturally things are going to lean, like Vindictor and Great Talon could feel even stronger than they actually are because the way that the game's like trended in a balance patch alone. So that's, again, like,
for sure.
Big patches are fun to talk about and look at, but there's way too much going on that you kind of go, like they did a lot of earn changes last patch, and then they've added more earn changes on top of the big changes that they made last time, and now it's just 20 interactions stacked on top of each other.
Like, for example, like the Walker change is a great example of this, because reading the patch notes, when I read them, I was like, wow, what a fantastic change. I love this change. Now you'll be actually able to kill walkers, because before you would try to push a walker and there would just be like a 7, an Ivy, a Lady Geist just instant nuking your wave, and then it was just impossible to push it. But then the thing is, they made the walkers easier to kill. They made the buffer for backdoor protection much longer, and they made it so troopers have spirit resistance. So they addressed the problem 3 different ways. And now it feels like walkers are like literally made out of paper. Like walkers have like literally anyone walks up to a walker, it's dead. Like there's not even any point trying to defend it. Like it's just insta dead, but you can't do anything. Like a wraith, for example, walks up to a walker like at 14 minutes when the walker is at minus 30% resist. It's just like the walker's like instantly dead. Like split pushing walkers is very strong because you can kill them so quickly alone now, and they still give 4,000 souls to your team. Which is pretty significant amount. So yeah, it's like it was probably overdone once again, because they like that change alone is probably fine, but combined with the spirit resist of the troopers, which makes it so it's harder to kill the troopers. It's not that much harder, but a little bit. And the backdoor protection buffer, then it's like, okay, now it's actually like walkers are probably too easy to kill.
Yeah. Mid boss respawn timers decrease with subsequent kills. I haven't really seen many like interactions of this realistically, but like I can't think of any instances where this is a bad silly change to be making. Like if you're having subsequent mid bosses, the game's probably gone on for a considerable amount of time, or it's just chaos. So having them sort of show up earlier, and there's definitely, I think it was Boeing that said this to me, of like, if you're winning and the opponents steal the mid boss, it just adds 10 minutes to the game. Like it might not
Yep.
even like have them come back. It just makes the game again artificially longer. So the fact that you have mid bosses show up more often, I kind of like to, because it's the easiest way to confirm a win is mid boss into going into their base. Even if it's not necessarily needed, it's just a good way for people to go, okay, yeah, this is like the home stretch now. So we just go into their base
Yeah.
and do what we can. So that's nice, I guess.
I'm fairly confident that their vision is for the average game length to be like 30 minutes. And right now, Yoshi said the average game length is 34 minutes. He didn't say this to me specifically. One of my friends talked to Yoshi, and apparently the average game length before this batch was 34 minutes.
Okay.
So I'm pretty sure that they want it to be like 30 or so. I'm pretty sure that they think 34 minutes is too long.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm fairly confident that this is, a like informed decision about like how they want Deadlock to play. Because in Dota, it really varies by rank, but the average game length is a little bit closer to 40 minutes across, most average ranks. At higher ranks, it does go down. Because people are better at ending and capitalizing, and also people have weaker mental, so they give up faster.
Yeah.
But it's a bit of both. But like overall, it's closer to 40 minutes in Dota, and so I think they want Deadlock to be a little bit shorter of a game. So all of these changes are just contributing to like, hey, let's reduce the game length, let's make the walkers easier to kill, let's make mid boss so it respawns faster, so that people have more tools to end the game. Let's make it so that the respawn timer is longer at 30 minutes, right? Like they said now. 70 seconds starts at 30 minutes. So now a team wipe at 30 minutes is like, in a lot of situations, it's GG.
It's the end, yeah.
Yeah, which is fine. That's their design philosophy. I don't have a problem with it. And so like 30 minutes is like, a lot of games are going to end before that, probably.
Yeah, even like the base guardians and shrines
yeah.
not getting regen as well, which it's like we sort of mentioned about like artificially making the games longer. It feels that so much of that is focused at the start of a game, but as the game goes on later, it's very much like just end it, please.
Yeah, they just don't want the game to snowball out of control from the laning stage or from like just because before basically it was if you won the laning stage, you would snowball really quickly in terms of AP and stuff like that, and then it would feel like it was hard. And at the end of the day, I think in a MOBA, you want it to be like, okay, you want laning stage to be rewarding, which right now maybe it's not rewarding enough, but you also want you want compositions where they're not as strong at laning. You kind of want those to have like some possibility of winning too. Because it's interesting, like in Dota, there's going to be like tempo comps, and there's going to be comps that are like, hey, we're going to hit like our 20-minute timings, and then we're going to be really strong. If we can manage to kind of like cut our losses until then, we'll be good. So I don't think we want to be in like a meta where like in Dota, there's been many metas at TIs or whatever, where the meta is just like, hey, let's just get like Lycan, Tidehunter, like all these heroes that are just going to push towers instantly, and we're going to like win the game in 15 minutes, deathballing. Yeah. I don't think you want Deadlock to become that for the most part.
No, I mean, most games are just deathballing anyway. I think in something about the green lane is just ARAM, I swear, in just all of the games that I've been having. Like just jump into the team fight and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I will say the biggest thing that I see, like in my coaching sessions or just watching viewers games, is just like people are just like pick an area on the map, and then that's just like they just start fighting there for no reason, and then they're just fighting there for like minutes at a time. And like the other side of the map just gets ignored, or like one person takes care of the other side of the map, and then that person kind of like gets rich and wins.
Yeah.
So
or they get flamed for not being in the team fight, which I like just vibing as Lady Guys to just split pushing and take your walkers, especially now because you malice.
Lady Guys, you can literally take walkers instantly, like
you blow them a kiss and they fall down, kind of thing. And then if nobody deals with you, it's great. Medic heal cooldown. I guess this was just maybe like Medic Trooper now having 2 charges of it, so it was just maybe healing multiple people all at once, I guess.
No, it doesn't really change anything for players. For players, this is the same thing, because before you could get 2 heals from a Medic Trooper in like a best case scenario. And now you still can. The only thing it changes is that they mostly change this from like lanes like pushing by themselves kind of reason. So if you actually like booted the game and didn't do anything, sat and spawn, and then did like host timescale like 100 and just kind of like let the game go, some lanes would just like ultra push for no reason. And I think that this is partly why, or like they're testing different things around that. And I think that the medic trooper was probably one of the reasons why sometimes lanes would just insta push for no reason. So I don't know exactly why, but I believe that that's because from a laning perspective, it feels exactly the same.
Yeah. And then Sinner Sacrifice, now sharing souls, making it so that somebody just doesn't take basically all of it towards the end. But again, doesn't change too much. It's just like, all right, seems good kind of change.
Yeah, doesn't really matter.
The map changes I like, for one, especially the one like towards the bottom left, like the yellow lane, just the stairs that you would have there. Like, God, the amount of fights that just kind of get stuck in that uncomfortable spot is good. Again, it sort of feels like, and the new passageway where the new creeps are.
The new bounce pad is.
Yeah, that too. Like, I really like that space because it does feel like you can actually get in behind people that are just sitting on the walker and maybe catch them out.
It's a really nice place for like, you know, trying to make plays. Like, for example, let's say you're Lash, you're trying to push a walker there, you could go into that space and you could actually like try to get in from that side and like ult from there. So it's just nice, and it's also really nice for like jukes and stuff. Like, I had a couple of escapes yesterday where I just go into that passageway, take the bounce pad, like, you know, juke around, and it's just like, I'm always a big fan when they allow places to have like more individual skill representation with like jukes and things like that. So
yeah, I think it's always a problem with like incentivizing people to go farm the camps that are in the corners. Like here, not only have you got a camp, there's so many crates, there's so many boxes and statues that if you are needed to farm in a quiet area, like you can get a good amount from this space, so long as other people haven't taken it. And also, you know, when you get aggressive and you like farm their like chapel or their, I think it's a fire station is the other side. There is more of a chance for you to actually gank those players because you can come out this side and hit them. You got the TP. You can obviously just come through the main choke. Yeah,
I would say the other way is also true, meaning that if you are the attacker in this scenario, and you steal the chapel, let's say, you're also much more likely to be able to steal those corner camps, because before they were kind of death trap because there was no escape.
Yeah, because it's like a bottleneck that you have to kind of go in on. Yeah,
there's like a little jump pad, so you've got a couple opportunities.
Yeah, so a lot of miscellaneous changes. There's more, but there's just so much like minor stuff, and we've already spoken for a while. So I think item changes, the way that I was going to initially do this, and I guess we can still sort of do it if I'm on top of it, is looking at it for each of the tiers. So for weapon items, restorative shot has been nerfed. The weapon damage that you just get based on top of it is 6%, and the cooldown is increased ever so slightly. Rapid rounds, the fire rate buff has gone up. Monster rounds, the resist against NPCs has been reduced. High velocity mag, the shield health that you get is higher, the weapon damage that you do is higher, and the velocity of your bullets, the main thing it's about, has been nerfed to 20%. I think that, resto shot and monster rounds, whether it was because of the likes of Shiv, for example, where both of these things were like relatively good for him, same with Geist as well. I'm kind of glad that both these items got nerfed, because I'd say that they were just net buffs on pretty much everybody. And I still kind of think they are a little bit. Monster rounds has been nerfed as well because of the walker changes as well, where it's like you don't need to have monster rounds in order to do huge damage to a guardian or a walker, because they will just go down very quickly, very easily now anyway after a certain amount of time. So monster rounds, there's less reason to get it now outside of the laning phase, I think.
Yeah, the thing about the monster rounds before is guardians were also really hard to take, and so having monster rounds enabled you to like actually be able to take them a little bit easier in the lane. So it was just like a really good item. Now it got nerfed a little bit. I think it's still probably quite good, but yeah, it's nowhere near as powerful as it was. I think if you're still going to be hitting buildings a lot or hitting a lot of jungle creeps and you've got the slot for it, it's still going to be good, but it's a fine nerf. And all the other nerfs make sense. Like restorative shot was just like, restorative shot has been too powerful for quite some time. I guess they just needed to buff it for people to start buying it. That's what they do a lot, by the way. If you notice with their nerfs / buffs, is like an item might be perfectly fine, but it might be slept on. They'll buff it. Everyone will start buying it, and then they'll be like, okay, yeah, this item's too powerful. They'll nerf it, and then it'll be like right where it belongs because everybody stopped sleeping on it. They started using it. They're like, holy shit, this item's really good.
What's the item at the moment that you think is a sleeper pick still? Because I think the one that springs to mind the most is Spiritual Overflow for me as an item is just.
Yeah, I think Spiritual Overflow is like no longer a sleeper pick. Like they've buffed that item like so much that it's just like Spiritual Overflow is very, very strong, I think, on most characters. So I don't think it's a sleeper pick. I think probably the most sleeper item at the moment is probably like Veil Walker, honestly, and like Locket.
Locket for sure, yeah.
Veil Walker, Locket, and like I think also like it really depends because it's hard to fit in. But Withering Whip is also a little bit sleeper, maybe, although it's not that strong.
Yeah,
so
Cold Front now is the trend as well. That like it got nerfed, people stopped using it.
Like kind of bought, but it was yeah. I would say Cold Front sleeper. I think everybody knows Cold Front is like kind of insane now after the changes. But yeah, I think honestly, Veil Walker is probably the most sleeper pick at the moment because like people really underestimate the amount of mobility it gives you. So especially since other mobility like Majestic Leap got nerfed, Veil Walker is less than half the cooldown of Majestic Leap now. It gives you 4 meters per second of move speed for 5 seconds. And then on top of that, it gives you 500 shields. Now, granted, shields don't scale very well into the late game. I'll give you that. But like they do give you like a lot of tempo. So I think it's pretty slept on.
Yeah, and all of the buffs that you can get with it as well, like Enchanter's Barrier. If you have shields.
Yeah, if you want to go like full shields, like Enchanter's Barrier and Combat Barrier in a vacuum are both very, very strong items. So you can get like a lot of shields for quite a cheap price. And then obviously you do fall off if you go all in on shields at some point, but you have like really good tempo.
For sure. I wonder if they can do more with combat
also
barriers.
Siphon Bullets. Siphon Bullets is really strong, but I think a lot of people don't realize it. But I think a lot of high level players know that Siphon Bullets is really strong.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's on this list, I'll point it out, but there's definitely an item I'm like, yeah, people should be picking this a lot more now. We go into the tier 2 items though, because for rapid rounds, you know, it does more of what it should be doing in the first place. High velocity mag, doing less of what it should do.
All the other nerfs are kind of boring, to be honest. It's just like small number changes, like it doesn't really change much, like, you know.
Yeah.
And that's fine. That's the way it should be, I think, for a lot of these changes. Like, these items aren't like high velocity mag wasn't like broken, but it's like, okay, here's their vision. They want velocity to be like slightly less so that there's probably more of a reason to like, you know. I also think velocity shouldn't like completely make up for the fact that a character's gun has a shitty projectile. Because a lot of the time, the guns tend to be balanced, at least somewhat, based on how hard they are to hit, right? So if your projectile is hard to hit, usually you'll do more damage.
To use, like Kelvin,
like Ward's gun.
Yeah.
But like then you get pristine emblem, high velocity mag, whatever, and then it's just like, oh, this projectile is now super easy to hit, and it does a ton of damage.
For sure. I mean, I preferred it when high velocity mag went into Headhunter as opposed to pristine emblem. For me,
I think it made less sense from a design perspective, just because like a headshot booster not building it to Headhunter, just like it's the name of the item,
that's true.
Like essence, but yeah.
There, I guess there's other things, but yeah, for the tier 2 items, pretty much up to here. For melee charge, weapon damage has been reduced, health has been reduced. I'm thinking of something else clearly, but then they reduced the cooldown on it as well, or up the cooldown. Being able to use it. So
that was the previous patch.
Yeah. Still a crazy ability. Like crazy item, I think, for most people.
Oh yeah.
Long range now is a reduced reload time, another just net buff to Vindictor, Grey Talon. There's like other people that are starting to pick it up a bit more. But it no longer grants ammo, which sucks, I guess. Active reload now grants 18 plus ammo, but no longer grants the reload time. So basically, long range and active reload have swapped what they bring to the table. Mystic's shot cannot miss due to evasion, and the cooldown has been increased a good amount. And burst fire now grants 20% slow resistance, which is an interesting thing to be adding. So I always get burst fire and the other one mixed up, so I don't know if this is the tier 2 or the tier 3. Just off the image.
Yeah, burst fire is the tier 3.
Yeah. So we'll just talk about
So
these
the
four then.
Swift Striker is a tier 2.
That's it, yeah.
I mean, honestly, all of those changes, the only change in that's interesting is the long range, I guess. A long range and active reload. Mystic Shot is just like, okay, slight nerf, and then, okay, you can't evade it. So it's like characters like, because they didn't really have evasion before Mirage in the game, so didn't really consider it. So I think that's the only reason that these things are added. So like now it's like, okay, evasion's a thing, so we need to make it so these items don't suck against evasion, which is fair. Melee charge was just like an insane stat stick of an item that like you could buy it on literally anyone, even if you didn't want a melee, and it was just like, okay, this is good. And long range and active reload, long range hasn't been bought for a very long time, so they were like, okay, we need to change something. 25% ammo in the grand scheme of things is not that valuable of a stat because there's a lot of ways to get ammo into the game.
Mm-hmm.
But minus 20% reload time, there's only, well, now this is really the only source of it. There's no other source. So it is a significant buff. I don't really like it because I don't feel like it makes sense for an item like long range to give you reload time.
Yeah.
Like it just doesn't really feel like it fits the item itself. And so I'm fine with them buffing the item. I don't really think that from a design perspective, this buff makes that much sense, but the item is a lot better now, and active reload is worse.
Yeah, I think this is the part of the game, balance-wise, that Valve's going to struggle with the most. It's just ranged abilities, snipers, in a game where there's really no fog of war, that you can pretty much traverse any point on the map and get a sightline from one side of the map to the other in some instances, right? So I do think that, like, stuff like Vindicta, Grey Talon, any other, like, long-range characters that they want to add into the future are all going to struggle from this side of it. Like, even like Bebop's range had to be cut down a significant amount over the last couple of months, just because it felt like when you have so much vision and there's so much verticality, being able to hit somebody from a range that they can't even feasibly deal with you is just way too strong. So it's the only part of the game that I'm kind of worried about. And so not being in a Vindicta Grey Talon meta, despite me loving playing Grey Talon, I've been more than happy with. And then it makes close quarter characters or high mobility, which we saw very meta like a month or two ago, incredibly prevalent. So I don't envy Valve trying to deal with that side of the game for sure, because the range on some characters is just going to make them inherently broken in some cases.
I think the thing with sniper characters is they have to be broken when the stars align. Like basically, it kind of has to be like how they balance, you know, sniper and Dota or whatever, where it's like, yeah, if you don't deal with sniper, like he will kill your entire team. I think that Grey Talon and Vindicta have to be kind of that in that sphere. But the problem is like they kind of exist in a vacuum, like meaning that on paper they're like huge sheets of like, oh, very impressive stats with like big damage and things like that. But in a real game, you know, like Vindicta just gets slammed by like a million different things and like knockdowns and like CC and just so many things to deal with the sniper characters that even though they're very strong, they tend to not be OP, and they have been OP at times in the past, but it tends to be quite rare. And a lot of the time, at best, they're like B tier or like A tier. There's only been like a few moments where Vindicta was actually like truly broken, and like, you know, that's probably like back in May when you could do a bunch of like really, really dumb stuff with Vindicta that was clearly not intended. So a bunch of like quote unquote bugs.
Features.
Yeah, exactly. So, but other than that, yeah, I think it's fine.
It's also important because you sort of mentioned about sniper. Like, this is also, it's important to keep it almost tempered for Valve until there's actually pick bans in the game. Because if you're playing ranked and you sort of see the day of Vindicta and nobody on your team, like you've just got an Abrams, Shiv, Mo, and Krill, and you're just like, well, we should just lose. Like, if we at least see them pick that in a pick ban phase, you can try to counter it or negate it completely by taking it out, right? So I think having characters that just, like you said, if the stars align that they could be broken, if you can't predict that realistically, it's just going to feel ass to play against. Whereas, like, I don't think, like, I know Shiv was incredibly broken, but if you have a pick ban phase with players that know what they're doing, that doesn't become a problem. You could bring back old Shiv and you could have just ban him, or you'd be like, all right, if they're going to pick this, we pick this, this, and that, and just shut him down. I still think you'd do really well, but you get the point of, like, a character can be super broken, but you can still either try to get it yourself or get rid of it or try to find counters to make it uncomfortable or take other strong stuff in the meanwhile, and hope that that's enough, I think.
Yeah, I think that's one of my biggest issues with ranked at the moment, which is like, I think just give one ban per team, like that people vote on, and just do like a very simple draft. And I know that some people are afraid that it's going to bring toxicity into the game, and that is probably a
Already
fairly
here.
valid concern.
just send it. Yeah.
It's already a fairly valid concern. But at the end of the day, I think that, toxicity can be kind of dealt with, but like bad team comps and just like unfun matchups and things like that, people are getting better at the game. Like before in May, there was no such thing as like a bad comp because like nobody knew what the hell was going on in anything. But now people like me have been playing the game for 5 months, right? And we've got like 1,000 games played, and while that may not be like that's not like a ton in like a MOBA game, I have like 4,000 games of Dota or whatever. Like 1,000 games is enough to the point where we're starting to be like, hey, these characters are really strong if you don't have this counter. Like we're starting to figure out a little bit more about team compositions and roles in Deadlock and stuff like that. So I do think that they need to bring draft to ranked, just at least test it out. And I suggested they should just do it for the higher ranks at first. Like
I was about to say the same thing. Yeah.
Just make it so like, I don't know, Ascendant and Eternus get draft. And then leave the rest alone.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, yeah, it's the time to be messing with stuff, I think, and you kind of get to see a lot of the interactions and how teams would adjust to it. Might also make people more interested naturally in the esports scene because then they see how people effectively draft.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I think everybody's gonna stop playing ranked. Like right now, I feel like a lot of Eternus players are kind of like boycotting ranked. Like Salty and I, we had like a bunch of terrible games yesterday where like we're the only Eternus players in the lobby, and it's just like, where are all the Eternus players? And I'm pretty sure that a lot of them are just not playing ranked, because of the like poor game qualities and maybe lack of draft and a bunch of different things. And like there's gonna be like pickup game systems that are gonna come along, like maybe Face It or things like that. And like if ranked doesn't like fix its issues quickly, those systems are going to like overtake, and then it's going to make it so that competitive scene is like a little bit
CS,
less accessible.
Right? Like just ranked in CS is just not playable.
Like, yeah, exactly. Like nobody plays ranked CS, everybody goes to play Face It, right? So like I'm against that, and I want the competitive scene to be as accessible as possible. Like I want someone who has never played Deadlock, who starts today, to be able to kind of like know what they need to do to play against like the best players in the game, and for that to be possible all inside the game, right? So I just want them to be able to just queue ranked a bunch, climb up the ladder, and eventually be against the best players in the game. I don't want them to be like, okay, I have to queue the ladder, and then I'll have to like download Face It, start playing Face It Pugs, try to make a name for myself there. Like, I think it's just very convoluted.
It's a very first world problem, but this stuff always finds its way down to the lower ranks. Like there's a trickle down mechanic always with this kind of stuff. And frankly, if you see your favorite streamers not playing ranked, why would you play ranked? That kind of thing. And it's a shame because, like, especially for us, it's like trying to incentivize people to play ranked to get like 20 games in. Like for the players that aren't Eternus to get there and sort of use it as a chance to. I love that it's solo queue, for one. I really like that it's just no BS kind of situations with that. But yeah, it's not going to keep people. And that's usually why they add in a rank system like this, is so people have something to play for in the game when they're at the higher ranks, right? It's a purely like vanity thing, but if you don't keep those players interested, they are just going to leave and stop playing. Which is always a problem with rank 2.
At the end of the day, I think that they're like, I know that the top 1% or the top 0.1% or whatever is like a very small portion of the player base. But a lot of the time, that portion of the player base is like the most passionate, the most active, and tends to be kind of like the heart of a game. And I think if the top 0.1% have a great time in your game and love the game, and I think it like helps the whole community flourish. I don't think that players in lower skill levels should be disregarded as well. I think everyone can have their Deadlock to play. but I think it's important not to neglect that. And I think Valve has done a good job of that in some other titles, like Dota, for example. Everybody plays ranked, even like all the pros, so it works. But like, yeah, you want to keep like the top players happy to an extent, which I think ranked has kind of failed to do, which is totally okay because it's a time to test things and etc. So it's not like a complaint, but it's more just so like, hey, maybe we should think about this.
Yeah, it's also like with people saying that like the attitude of the top level players, like Mercurial saying, is like that's what spreads to the rest of the community. It's also why people couldn't talk about the game for the longest time. It is just because of the fact that they didn't want, when it came to balance, people to just be parroting what Shroud says about the game. Shroud says something's broken, and how many other people are gonna either just sort of agree with him or just be influenced by him. Like, I really liked that this game, nobody could really talk about it or make content outside of the forums because you had to think of it yourself. You didn't just follow along to what, like, the meta build was and stuff like that. And it provoked conversation with the community within the space. Like, and seeing people like Catgirl, like, just become much more prominent when it comes to, like, Ivy and stuff, and seeing the discussion around that. And I was following Idorian's guides before. I think I had like Deathy's guide for Shiv before I even like knew who you were, right? It's like seeing people and following along with stuff like that has been fun, but it also made me have to think about the game individually. But we're still on the items. So Burst Fire, Slow Resistance, kind of touched on that. Sharpshooter, I don't know if this is like more reload time. I think this is just the changes from like long range carrying on.
Yeah, it's the same thing.
And then Tesla Bullets, proc cooldown can now be reduced by cooldown reduction. I really like that. I don't know if there's any characters that's super impactful on other than Wraith, because you might get cooldown reduction for your ultimate, for example. And that's the only character that you might get.
You can get cooldown reduction on almost anyone, because cooldown reduction is just like a good stat because it applies to items, it applies to everything. So I think it's just like a buff overall. And now with Spiritual Overflow being as good as it is, it also gives cooldown reduction, by the way. So just FYI.
The Tesla Bullets,
so that's another thing.
Kind of hard.
Yeah, Tesla Bullet, Spiritual Overflow, makes sense, for example, in Wraiths, because it kind of gives you a lot of things that you want. At the end of the day, I still think Tesla Bullets is like, it's a pretty good item on Wraith. I think that Tesla Bullets tends to fit less of an active playstyle. So it really depends what your vision is. If you feel like you're going to hit creeps a lot, then it's always a good item. But yeah, it's kind of in that area right now. So I don't mind them buffing it a little bit because it felt maybe slightly weak. So this is like an interesting way to buff it. I'm not a big fan of like the cooldown affecting items in general. So I guess like I don't really think that item should be affected by cooldown reduction. So I'm not a big fan of that part. But other than that, like whatever.
Imagine if you could put like the superior cooldown on an item. Like Majestic Leap, you could just reduce the cooldown on that even more, or something silly. Haze is just putting it on
Leap,
Silencer. God, that'd be horrible. But so Titanic Magazine, you get more Spirit Resist, you gain more melee damage resistance, which is interesting. There's not many instances of like melee damage resistance in the game.
Yeah, I think they just added that because like Calico is probably going to be coming to the game soon enough. I mean, she's in Hero Labs. And she does melee damage as well. And I think that part of the reason they're adding that is because of Calico, but I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, I mean, because I was quite surprised that they didn't make many changes on melee items full stop, other than melee charge. Like Live Strike can be really strong in the right hands. Even Spirit Strike, Colossus too. Seems to be very little to do with them. When melee ship was pretty
they did nerf Colossus, but like the thing about melee items is that if you make them like, it's very hard to balance those items because they kind of have to be OP because people have to like if you get parried meleeing, then you're stunned for quite a while, and it's like a very high risk scenario. At the same time, if you make them like not great, then like nobody's gonna take the risk of getting parried for that shit. So it's kind of hard to balance in a way.
Yeah.
I don't know if they're like that broken. I think the melee items are probably in a decent spot. I think melee charge is probably still really strong. I think the 500 melee items are just like, they're really strong laning items, but I don't think they're like broken per se, but they are insane value for sure.
Yeah. It's interested to see how that's gonna go in the future, because just melee charge on a lot of different characters just to give you that extra ammo is really nice. And even the range on it, even just the extra range, even trying to get a mid boss, just having a little bit more reach in order to try and hit it can be useful in the right hands. I wouldn't buy it just for that, but comes in handy. A lucky shot, proc now pierces evasion. Same with the
Once again,
above
just
changes.
Mirage change.
Yeah. Then Vampiric Burst, health increase from 150 to 175. I need to let my girlfriend in because she can't get through the second door in our house, but I think they're pretty general changes, right?
Yeah.
Do you want to handle
really crazy?
Do you want to handle the vitality item changes for tier 1?
Yeah, sure, go for it. Yeah. Yeah, go.
And extra regen, deservedly nerfed, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, so the thing about the vitality items, to be honest, I'm a little bit disappointed with the changes. The reason for that is I feel like regen items are contributing right now to kind of laning being in solo lanes, especially like a little bit boring. What I mean by that is that it feels like in solo lanes, it's incredibly hard to push your advantage, unless you have like a very favorable matchup or you play much better than the opponent, which a lot of the time doesn't really happen. So a lot of solo lanes will just kind of like end up being a draw. And extra regen is one of the items contributing to that because it gives like 3 health regen. And then there's also healing right being super strong. So I was kind of a little bit sad to not see more nerfs to just regen and lane in general.
Yeah.
I think that if you take a lot of damage, you should be punished for it. And right now it feels like you take a lot of damage and whatever, you don't really care. So like, for example, healing right has like a way too short of a cooldown in my opinion. Like I think that they should make it so that the effect is faster, but you can only use it maybe once every 2 to 3 minutes instead of once every minute. Because like right now it kind of feels like if you get healing right, restorative shot, extra regen, whatever, like melee lifesteal, you can pretty much sustain through almost anything. And like you won't win your lane, but you also like you can't lose it.
It's also just like the amount of ammo that you get for extra regen as well. Like just what it provides normally is really strong. This is one of the items, like you mentioned, of like they buffed it to get people to use it more. For me, it felt like that with extra regen, but it just provides so much. It's like Hollow Point Ward used to be the same thing, where it's like it didn't matter who you were, you just bought it because it would just give you so much like power. And then they sort of stripped it back a little bit. For me, extra regen is that. Like, there's no reason and there's no character that wouldn't want to get this, just for what it provides.
Honestly, it's kind of funny that you say this because I feel like extra regen at the moment is actually just kind of like not really bought that much at like high level, and the reason for that is because like everyone just buys healing right, because like you probably don't buy both because healing right just like takes you from 200 to full pretty much. And so like you're not going to spend 2 slots for regen unless you're absolutely getting hammered in lane. So a lot of time people will just buy healing right and also the stats that healing right kind of gives for a lot of characters are nice. The movement speed while moving, the bonus health, the spirit power. You get 45 bonus health, whereas extra regen doesn't give you any bonus health. It just gives you 10% ammo, which is like a nice stat. But once again, I think that there are a lot of sources of ammo in the game. Like I don't think it's that hard to get ammo. So 10% ammo to me is less valuable than like 3 spirit and 45 health. So I think extra regen is kind of like, I would also want it nerfed, but I think the bigger problem is like healing right, So
yeah, like healing right should be just.
I think extra regen being nerfed a little bit is fine.
The opposite of a stat stick, even of just getting healing right, it should be just for the heal. Like it shouldn't have any extra stats on top of it. I don't think. Like
I'm fine with that. I'm fine with the heal being like a little bit stronger. But you need to have like no stats, and it can have just the base stats. That's fine. And that's basically how I feel about it. The other vitality changes are just like extra health is the big one. Now upgrades into fortitude. That's a huge fortitude buff. Because now you can buy extra health in lane, which is a very strong item early on.
Yeah, which you tend to get
an upgrade for it.
Yeah, because fortitude is like it's never been seen as a bad item. It's just other stuff takes priority. So now, like the fact that you could get extra health and fortitude, which was like good on stuff like Shiv, good on stuff like Infernus, anything that can like leech, basically. Fortitude is really good for those characters too, right? So I like
Yeah.
Fortitude. I'd like to see it used more, and I think that hopefully this is enough of an incentive in order to do that, I think.
Yeah. I guess we'll see, but I think so far I haven't seen a ton of Fortitude, but I think it's a pretty good item at the moment, yeah. Enduring speed, slow resist nerfed is I think the only reason is because they added other slow resist, like for burst fire, for example.
Yeah.
And
it's also like, I think why they
got
buffed stamina, right? Because it's like there's some cases where you'd go endurance speed and like extra improved stamina, but if you had to pick between the two, like endurance speed always seemed to be the better option for pretty much everybody, outside of maybe like Great Talon, because you get so many stamina charges, and now you dash halfway across the map every time you do it when you're in the air. So
yeah. Reactive barrier gives more ammo. There's a slight buff. I think the item was slightly underbought, so they were just like, hey, let's buff it somehow. Let's give it more ammo, I guess.
Yeah, this is the item that I think is like very much a sleeper. Like, I mean,
it's really good.
Like the divine barrier is
it's really good,
really nice. It's still really strong with like the speed and the obvious barriers that you can put on yourself and your teammates. Yeah, I guess I just value ammo a lot for some weird reason, but I just think it's a item that, with so much CC in the game, especially at high levels, where you're gonna naturally run into one character that can sleep or stun or has an ultimate that could do a lot of CC. Having something like this isn't going to save you 10 times out of 10, but it's gonna do really well in the early game, I think, for sure. And especially if you're a newer player.
If you're laning against like Wraith, for example, like just getting reactive barrier like makes it so that when she gets ult, like she has no chance of killing you.
Yeah.
Like she literally has 0 chance of killing you with reactive barrier and her ult, because reactive barrier will tank all of her ultimate's spirit damage, and then it'll tank a lot of her bullet damage while she's shooting you. So you're going to take some card damage, and that's pretty much it. Like, let's say that she has 2 to 3 cards, you're going to tank that, but usually that won't be enough to just like kill you from full health.
For sure.
Same with like Bebop. Bebop hooks you, you like literally get more health.
Yeah. And like the
like
cheese with like Haze, like you get slapped and then melee and then just either full clip or ultimate. Like now you can just survive against that. So just, if you're ever in lane against those kind of characters that will just have a spike where they can stun you, just always worth picking up. Because once they realize they can't kill you, they start panicking.
Lash's ground strike, if he has 2 points in it, also procs it. So there's a lot of things that proc it, basically. It gets procced by quite a bit of things. It actually used to not get procced by a lot of things, but now they changed it a couple times. It used to be like a really, really bad item, but and then it was a really broken item, and now it's probably like right around where it needs to be.
Yeah, it just probably didn't do what it was supposed to, but you could sort of clearly see what the item was meant to do. Majestic Leap going onto the tier 3s had its cooldown increased to 45 seconds. Getting shot while in the air disables the drop down ability. Yeah. So this is now down to 40. So it's still a 15-second duration increase, or 14 seconds technically, but you get my point. Much needed. It just sort of felt like there were so many characters that could make use of this. 40 seconds is still like a good amount of time to be using it. I think it's a fair amount of time, but I think it also like lines up with stuff like Warden a bit more, because your ultimate, as the quickest it could possibly be, is probably towards 40 seconds, and it's like 20 seconds, right? Like, so you can line it up a little bit better, and it's still a strong combo that you can do, but it's not something that you can just have open and available to you at any given point. Especially with the map being made bigger, Majestic Leap was just an item that just got so much more value, despite it not being really changed that much. And then the small things of like the drop down that you have, the little jump once you hit the ground, so you like skip across the ground a bit more. It sort of felt a little bit like they saw Majestic Leap a little bit too much on various characters as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think Majestic Leap changes were deserved, and like we'll see if it's like too much or whatever. The biggest one, the cooldown's obviously huge, but also getting shot while in the air disables the drop down is also huge, because a lot of characters like Warden or Pocket wanted to use it to get in people's faces. So now if you see them in the air, you just shoot them. They like can't drop down on you really fast. So to me, that's kind of what killed the old Warden build as well. I didn't play around with it too much, but I saw that and I was like, ooh, yeah, that's gonna feel really bad because if you're ulting in the air and you get shot, it's just gonna like a lot worse. But
yeah, you can't cancel your ult, so it's like, well, I'm getting no value from this, or at least not the same level of value.
Yeah, getting less value. Yeah.
Rescue beam, pulse speed reduced by 20%, sprint reduced from 2 to 1. Does the pulse speed affect like the slingshot that much?
Oh yeah, it does. Yeah, it does a lot. You can still slingshot, but it's like before you could like literally slingshot people like across like half the map, like with the urn, for example.
Yeah.
And now you can't like do that as much. It's been reduced. The slingshot has been reduced by way more than 20%, basically. I would say slingshot has been reduced in half, pretty much, how much you can do.
Okay.
So the initial speed like is way lower. So yeah, it's a big nerf to that, which is good because like slingshotting people is like, you know, super dumb. Clearly not intended. And also like rescue beam is just like inherently a super broken item. I'm honestly surprised it didn't get nerfed more. So yeah.
Yeah, especially like a cooldown duration increase could have been.
I think honestly, it's not even the cooldown. I think the biggest thing that needs to be nerfed is like just the range. The range is the most problematic part of it. Like being able to like, you know, rescue beam people from like the skybox is like the biggest problem.
Yeah.
Kelvin, like you're just going Kelvin and you're just like rescue beaming from the skybox your teammates, and it's like, well,
there's some other item. Oh, it was knockdown. I don't usually pick up knockdown, but I did the other day and I was like, the range on this is crazy. Like there's a lot of items. I guess it's good that active items do have like crazy range, but
I think knockdown needs insane range, and like they made it a lot of changes so that knockdown as a stun is a lot weaker, but it has just a much bigger range because they want knockdown to be like an interrupt.
Yeah.
They don't want it to be a stun. It used to be like a.
It's like a 7-2 at a base level. Like you're about to get stunned, get to safety, or you're dead. Or if you were using an ability in a bad point, you're gonna get punished.
Yeah. They just wanted so that there's some counterplay to things like, you know, 7 ult, Vindictive Flight, Great Talon Flight, because slowing X doesn't stop that anymore. So it's like, yeah.
So Fortitude not only coming from extra health, it gives you more health, which is probably the extra health amount attached on. Delay reduced a second, and weapon damage increased slightly. So really not buffed that much, but hopefully it is just enough of an incentive to get people to play it more, because it's like, it's a great item. It's just when you're looking at even like the tier 3 items for Vitality, you've got Veil Walker, which you mentioned strong, improved armors, Rescue Beam, Majestic. Like there's a lot of really good tier 3 items that it just felt the Fortitude wasn't really good enough or all-purpose enough to be used over it, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. I think Fortitude had its moments. I'm a big Fortitude fan. Always have been, so I'll be buying it more. Really depends on the characters, but I think it gives you a lot of movement speed too, which feels nice when it's active. And the regen also feels nice because if you're not building lifesteal a lot of the time, you might struggle. So yeah, it's just, I think it's a good item. I think we'll see if it's bought more now, but like 365 health is a lot of health. I mean, it is a lot of health.
Yeah, you got Life Strike as well, which is another crazy good tier 3 item in the right hand. So just feels that there's a lot of competition, which is good, but Fortitude as a good item just isn't really seen at the top. Veil Walker, this felt like, you know, when you mentioned like making items that were already strong better to incentivize people to use it and then tone it down. Felt like they kind of did this with Veil Walker where they nerfed it super hard. And then it was still good enough, but just buffing it up slightly to incentivize people to go back to this again. And I genuinely think it won't be long until we see a lot more Veil Walker just on various characters again, because the concept of the item is great, but it's naturally incredibly strong. Not as strong as it used to be with like the fire rate, but still, like you mentioned, movement speed is a bit of a underrated part of its kit.
Yeah, I mean, I think Veil Walker is like just invisibility in a MOBA is always going to be strong, especially in a MOBA where there is no form of detection. And in Deadlock, you rely quite a bit on sound, and your footsteps are completely silent. So I've been absolutely terrorizing the ranked ladder with Veil Walker. And I think it's very strong, especially on a character like Warden that can really like characters that move at the speed of light basically benefit from this a lot because the amount of space that they can cover in the duration of the invisibility is really strong. I think the shield part of it is just like it's okay. Like shields are still kind of meh because they don't scale that well.
Yeah, that's why it works with
But
Warden though, because you got willpower and stuff that gives you shield, and just it's the character that probably synergizes the most with combat and enchanters shields, right? Everybody else,
for sure, it synergizes pretty
I'd say
decently.
for everybody else, health and leech is more impactful. There's not many that really get the most out of barriers as such.
Yeah. And yeah, Siphon Bullets. I mean, Superior Stamina was buffed. I think it's fine. The item was like not really bought that much. I think mostly just because Majestic Leap was so prevalent that you didn't really need it. I think characters like Lash are going back to buy it. So just giving it a little bit more spirit power, it's better for Lash, so I'm happy.
You get a lot of Superior Stamina as well, don't you? It gives you an assortment of secondaries.
I mean, it gives you 7% fire rate, 12 spirit power, stamina recovery, air jump / dash distance, and you get +3 stamina as well. So it's a pretty good item. And the Soul Rebirth changes are really good. The cooldown was increased and it doesn't give you cooldown reduction. So before, like, you literally just bought Soul Rebirth, and even though it had a 212-second cooldown, since it had cooldown reduction, it was effectively a 180-second cooldown.
Yeah.
So it was just kind of dumb. Now it's 240 seconds, which is Soul Rebirth meta is still gonna I don't think this change is gonna change anything. I think that they're gonna need to do something a lot more radical to like prevent Soul Rebirth meta, because right now it feels like if it's 35 minutes into the game, the team that has more Soul Rebirths is still gonna win. Like nothing else matters. It doesn't matter what stats it gives. Like the fact that it allows you to win a fight 35 minutes into the game if you have more Soul Rebirths than the enemy team, that's the biggest issue.
It's the same with healing, right? Isn't it? Just you want it to just be that alone, because that alone is so strong. You don't want it to be giving you anything extra, because that's just more incentive to buy it over buying something that can make you stronger.
Yeah. One thing they could do, there's a couple ways that they could fix Soul Rebirth, in my opinion. One of the ways that they could fix it is that you can only have like a certain amount on your team. For example, let's say you're limited to 1 or 2 Soul Rebirths. That could be an idea. This is something that, for example, item resources in Dota have been limited in the past. So like in Dota, for example, there's only a certain amount of tangos in the shop available, or a certain amount of mangoes or things like that. So you could make it so that there's only 1 available per team or something, so that we're not in like a super boring like Soul Rebirth meta where everyone at 35 minutes buys Soul Rebirth, and like it's literally like if you're not buying it, you're throwing. Or you just remove the item. I don't necessarily think that's a great item. I'm not a huge fan of it. And people, like they've removed the items in Dota all the time, so I don't see why they couldn't do it in this game too. So I'm not a big fan of the item, and I think like it needs to be like reworked or something, because it just kind of feels really bad.
Yeah, I think it takes so much sort of stock out of the game almost. Like, for me coming from Valorant, where so much of dying is so impactful with the round and stuff, like having that kind of ability, it's pretty much aligned with an ultimate on certain characters, right? Like Clove or Resin people with Sage and stuff. But even then, those characters are not super strong enough to be playing them every single time. Not like Mercy when it was like the Moth meta and stuff like that, right? Or even just old Mercy, the impact out there. I sort of agree with you. Like, I don't think there's a way to make this ability or this item even...
Like, even if you double the cooldown, like, even if you make it a 480-second cooldown, I think the meta is still going to be the same.
Yeah, even if it's just you buy it for 6k and it gets used when you have to... like, it gets completely used up after you die the first time, so you've spent 6k in order to do it.
Yeah.
It still would be crazy strong. It's like a literal buyback, yeah.
Yeah, I think people would still do it. Like, I don't because if the other team has 6 Soul Rebirths and you have 2, chances are you're going to lose the fight. And if it's 35 minutes into the game, if you lose the fight, you've lost the game. And so you need to invest everything you can into winning that fight. And it just feels like Soul Rebirth kind of cheeses that and makes the fight kind of just like, okay, guys, we've got 6 Soul Rebirths. They have 3. They kind of messed up. Let's like run at them and try to fight them as hard as we can.
Yeah. I agree with you. It's like, I don't think the item's super problematic, but it's more of it's not super problematic right now. Like this is a thing that, like, yeah, in
It's only
coordinated
problematic
games,
when the games get late enough.
yeah,
Like,
at the highest level, right? So once you see
yeah,
like people in the ranks that we sort of mentioned before that are like having 40-minute plus games, and they sort of realize how broken Soul Rebirth is, and then it gets like once those two things like collide, that's where it's going to become complaining
I'm
on
sure we'll see
Reddit
Reddit
levels
posts
of
and like
annoying.
if it doesn't get changed in 2 months, we'll probably see like Reddit posts that are like Soul Rebirth needs to be changed. And it'll be like every 40-minute game, there's 12 Soul Rebirths in the server, and I'll be like, yep.
Yeah, it's I don't like the idea of like limiting it to one or a couple of people because it's just taking a game hostage there potentially if you're like solo queuing. Just some idiot decides to pick it up when it'd be better on somebody else. But like, yeah, I think if it gets to a point where lots of people are picking up Soul Rebirth just for that aspect, it's never a good sign to see 6 different characters all picking up the same item because the same item is broken. Like no matter whether it's
much.
tier 1 or tier 4.
Yep.
But yeah, Siphon Bullets recently moved over from being a weapon item to a Vitality 1. HP Steel per bullet increased. It's good for sure. Leech has 12% cooldown reduction, no longer grants spirit power. I feel like this is probably in the same
Basically moved the
position.
cooldown reduction from Soul Rebirth to Leech, basically.
Yeah. And then because Leech
is
given
actually
spirit
kind of a
power
bad
was
item
just
now, I think.
Yeah, because the spirit power was just like kind of like I said before with this, well, having a cooldown reduction and a strong thing. It's the same here of like giving you spirit power on, say, Infernus, who's going to want to pick up Leech, or Geist. Basically, anybody that's looking to pick up Leech is probably going to have a meaningful amount of spirit damage. That it's like having extra spirit power just makes that item so much better than it needs to be. It's the same sort of thing of like, these tier 4s should be very, very good at a specific thing, but the weakness is you're spending a lot of money in that like specific vertical. But if you have items that also give a good amount of spirit power, like it's not a huge amount, but it's enough.
Mm-hmm.
It just means like, why would I ever pick like the highest tier version of spirit over like Leech in specific cases? Especially items just called Leech, where it's like, does what it says on the tin, doesn't need to have any other bells and whistles. It's just going to be really strong for an assortment of different characters.
Yeah, right now Leech feels pretty meh in general. Lifesteal stacking multiplicatively just has made the item still kind of not great because you don't actually get that much more lifesteal than you do if you have like a lot of characters that bought Leech were spirit-based characters like Infernus or things like that. And they already had Soul Shredder bullets, Spirit Lifesteal, and Healing Booster. And if you get those 3 items, you basically get a similar amount of lifesteal to just Leech at like half the cost. So
yeah,
it doesn't really feel that great unless you really want to benefit from the cooldown reduction and the fact that it's bullet and Spirit Lifesteal. So if you want to benefit from both types of lifesteal, Leech is good, but you kind of have to sell your other lifesteal items for it to make sense.
Yeah, you don't want it to just be too much stuff stuck on top.
You just want Leech and Healing Booster. You just want Leech and Healing Booster. You don't want any other source of lifesteal, ideally, because it's just like not worth it.
Yeah. The car battery Geist, for example, is basically that. Phantom Strike now giving spirit resist instead of bullet resist. Feel like that's just like a sign of the times, right? Just so much more bullet damage available, not as much spirit resist. So maybe there was just a lot of instances of somebody dashing in, whether it's a Dynamo with his ultimate, whether it's our favorite Moen Krill Phantom Striking player, maybe felt less likely that you were just going to get absolutely annihilated when you're doing it. And also, it's separates yourself a little bit away from Warpstone.
Yep, that's true. That's true. There's a lot of sources of bullet resist, but they did swap it with Unstoppable. So Unstoppable now grants 15% bullet resist instead of spirit resist. So they just did a little swap between Phantom Strike and Unstoppable. I guess the idea behind that is that Unstoppable by nature kind of helps you counter more spirit-based because it counters abilities.
Yeah.
And so now, if you had Unstoppable before, it was like, okay, you also have spirit. Now it's a little bit less strong. I consider this like a nerf to Unstoppable because getting bullet resist is quite easy nowadays. So bullet resist is less valuable. So they buffed Phantom Strike and nerfed Unstoppable. It's kind of just how I just see it.
Yeah, I guess also like because Phantom Strike disarms, right? So like naturally people are just going to start using abilities against you. So
that is also true.
it's like having bullet resist when they can't shoot doesn't really give you much. So, and then unstoppable. It's sort of similar to Leech and Soul Rebirth. Like, it gives you so much anyway that like having one extra move speed is just extra cherry on top. Colossus, the slow reduced is nice. Slow radius is reduced too. Still a fantastic item. I'm glad that now it's working, because there was definitely a period in the game where Colossus was just not being used by anybody because it was just ass as an item. It was never really that effective. Now there's a lot of instances where it can be good, not just melee builds, but just tanky people full stop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Spirit items.
Yeah. So we'll go through the only 2 tier 1s actually, which is probably very few instances where spirit items in the early stage haven't been changed. But Mystic Reach giving bullet resistance and the actual range you get has been reduced. There have been a lot of builds and a lot of instances that I've seen of people picking up Mystic Reach, not upgrading it to like improved reach, just because this version with the range that you've got extra was more than enough. Like as a tier 1, it was crazy what you could do with it, to the point that there was no point upgrading it, it felt like.
Yeah, and I would say that's still true even after this change, and the reason for that is because improved reach is good, and you're going to go it on some characters when you're really committed to a build that benefits from like reach, because it's, at some point there's only so many ways to scale. So, like, for example, like I've been playing a lot of Warden recently, and I'm like, okay, I want reach for my cage, and so I just get regular reach. And then there's another item that you can get, which is just Divine Barrier, which also gives you ability range.
Yeah.
And so if you combine those two, right now you get, I believe, 23% ability range combining those two, which is quite a bit. And before it was even more. Before it was like 26% before, which was kind of insane. And Divine Barrier is just a good item overall. So I don't know if they'll keep the ability range on Divine Barrier. They might not. But right now, it feels like you're not really incentivized to go improved reach unless you really, really benefit from having a lot of reach
on a specific item. And the fact that it ticks multiple boxes, like you mentioned with Warden, not only does it affect the range of you being able to grab somebody with your binding word, but it also increases the radius of the grab area. Like, think of Geist, the range that you can throw an essence bomb, but also the radius of the essence bomb as well. Like, that was the example that came to the top of my head of the amount of times that I've bought Mystic Reach as Geist, never bought improved reach, because it's like, this is big enough. This is more than enough like space for my stuff to land on. And it just helps in so many multifaceted ways. Like, just naturally in comparison to burst damage or cooldown or duration, reach just offers you more because it's the range of an ability and also the radius of an ability too. And yeah, for a 500 cost item, it's still pretty major. I wonder I wonder if at any point you'd move up to a tier 2, because you do have other items that are like that in that space. Like, that might feel fairer. I don't think it's like super broken.
I think it's fine, because I don't think it's broken, because I think that there's a lot of really good spirit items for 500, so it feels like it's a very contested space. So I don't think Mystic Reach is like completely. I think with the small change, it's fine. I think honestly, like if anything, it might be improved reach that might need more incentives. But they also buffed improved reach a little bit. I guess they just gave it a little more bullet resist. So maybe giving improved reach some more extra stats, even though it already gives 8 spirit power and 13 bullet resist. Maybe buffing the spirit power gives a little bit or something, like
1% change.
But maybe it's also possible that it's already fine and people are just kind of sleeping on it. So that's always possible with Deadlock, right?
You're never eager to get improved reach. Like, improved burst, you're almost like, hell yeah. Like, that's when you can come online with so many different characters. But improved reach, not so much. Maybe on something like Lash, for example, just for flogs and range of your.
I've actually almost never bought improved reach on Lash, because the only time I buy it is like for my ult, because a lot of the time it feels like your abilities already have enough reach. Your ult is the only ability that you actually like really care about, which improved reach does give you a lot. So like, it might be, it's definitely something worth considering. Yeah.
Yeah, and ammo scavenger, the duration has increased from 30 to 35. Are we happy with the state of ammo scavenger? I feel like I just don't see it anymore after the nerfs it got 2 weeks
It's
ago.
good. It's still good in solo lanes. But it's just you can't buy it in dual lanes. It just doesn't work in dual lanes. Like you should only buy this item in solo lanes. In dual lanes, it's just too hard to get the souls.
Yeah.
So you like it takes way too long to get to max stacks. So in solo lanes, it's good. So I think the item's in a fine state because it's like there's situations in which it's very powerful, which I would say solo lanes, and there's situations in which it's not really that useful, like dual lanes. So I'm fine with an item like Ammo Scavenger being like situationally very strong.
Yeah, and you've just got more of a window to make it work too. Slow and Hex, the slow has been reduced a good chunk. Again, like what Slow and Hex does, just to stop people from using abilities to like teleport away or dash away. The extra slow was crazy. And that's again why a lot of people are buying endurance speed and not buying stamina as much, because just being able to deal with slow and Hex was such an important thing. Yeah. It's still like it offers
which is the only
a
item
crazy
in the
amount.
game that slows your stamina, by the way.
I mean,
there's nothing else that slows your stamina, by the way. If you get slowed by regular abilities, your stamina doesn't get slowed. But if you get slowed by slowing X, your stamina gets slowed. So
that's just ridiculous, really.
Yeah, I mean, slowing X has been like broken for quite some time.
Isn't it better to just have like
almost every character?
Is it just better to have like the warden effect that like it takes a stamina? Didn't they have that before, or am I just?
No, they didn't. They never had that before. It didn't slow stamina, so it didn't use to slow stamina. But then they added that because everybody stopped buying slowing Hex after it stopped like interrupting abilities.
Mm-hmm.
So like before it would interrupt abilities, right? Like it would interrupt
like flight for
flights and like flame dash or whatever. And then they were like, okay, we removed that. Now it only prevents usage, and then everybody stopped buying slowing Hex. And then they were like, okay, slowing Hex now slows stamina too, and now we've increased the slow to like 35% or something. And then people didn't buy slowing Hex immediately, but then slowly but surely everybody started buying slowing Hex. And now I think they're just like kind of finding a balance for it.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Just the one random tier 2 item being able to do that is crazy. Maybe there's a chance that characters in the future could do that, but I don't know if I'd want that necessarily, because it just seems broken. Even just like taking a stamina stack away felt like it was something that Valve were trying to tinker with to get it right, because there's definitely some instances where it was super strong early and then it wasn't strong enough later. Like stuff like Warden, I think even Haze had it. So when you slept at somebody, they would lose a stamina. Honestly, just amount of changes in my head. But I'm pretty sure that was one as well.
Yeah. At the end of the day, I think slowing X is probably in an okay spot now. Maybe it needs like maybe another slight nerf, but I think it's probably fine.
Yeah. I mean, active items should always feel strong, and the limiting should be how many you can get, right? Because you can only get 4. So,
yeah.
There's that side of it too. Improved cooldown now grants Spirit Shield, pretty much a bit of a nothing burger.
Yeah, it's just kind of nice. I mean, I think they're trying to overall like give more sources of shield so that shield builds feel a little bit stronger.
Oh, and it synergizes more actually with. It synergizes as well with Enchantress Barrier a little bit as well. So you do have like, you get those 2 items. Obviously, if you have Spirit Shield, you get cooldown reduction on abilities. So maybe they're just trying to have certain abilities synergize a little bit more. Because if you want to, like, I don't know, say for example, you're running Great Talent, you're just going for a bird build. You're going to buy these 2 abilities anyway. So it's a little bit more of a, you want to have your cooldowns reduced as much as possible. You would get improved cooldown. You'd also get Enchantress Barrier. And now they kind of like interlink onto each other, which I guess is kind of nice.
Yeah. I mean, I think overall they're just trying to like really get more sources of shields. I think that's the main thing that I see in the vision, is which could get very problematic, by the way. If you're not careful, like they've been adding shields to like a bunch of things for quite some time now. If you're not careful, like soon enough, there's going to be some like raid boss, shield builds that are just like, okay, they can go invisible on an 18-second cooldown with Veilwalker, and they just have like 1,000 bullet shield and 1,000 spirit shield at like 15 minutes, and it's just
Yeah,
really
divine
hard
barrier
to
that
deal
you can
with
just
them.
put on multiple people and
Yeah,
reactive
we're not
barrier.
honestly we're not far from that right now. I think a lot of people underestimate shields right now, and I think that we could be there. And then imagine that you get to late game, they get Diviner's Kevlar, so they've got another 1,400 shields. Shields just give a lot of just raw HP.
Mhm.
It's not as much EHP as like scaling armors gives you, but like you can get a lot of tempo with it, especially since like you can already get like a ton of shields just from buying regular items. Like Hollow Point Ward gives 95 Spirit Shield, for example. Like there are a lot of sources of
Headshot
Spirit Shield in
boost,
the game at the
well,
moment.
not spirit shield, but yeah, headshot. Like, yeah, that's why those items are so good in the early stage as well, just to give you a bit of a buffer to work with.
Yeah, like Knockdown is 200 Spirit Shield, Silence Clips 150. Like there's a decent amount. Shadow Waves 300.
Some buffs to the other active items though. Withering Whip, the projectile speed is increased by 30%. Still feels like it's looking back at the days where it disarmed people, wishing for those days to come back, but since then it's good against the right kind of characters like Haze. Like reducing fire rate is never gonna be something to scoff at. But at the same time, with all of the other active items, even Cold Front, like double damage against NPCs is like crazy strong in the right hands. Just as a villain, there's many reasons that you'd want Withering Whip over anything else, other than to reduce their bullet resistance, I think, as well. And that's another like little side thing that it has attached to it.
I think reducing their bullet resistance is actually the main reason that people buy Withering Whip. The fire rate slow is like nice, but it's very rarely the reason that people buy it.
Yeah.
It's more just like another bullet resist shredder, basically, that you can get on top of bullet resist shredder, which gives you, a little bit of other things. But I think that it does have kind of like a weird. I think that it's weird that it has an offensive aspect with the bullet resist and a defensive aspect with the fire rate slow. I would much rather that they go towards like all in on offense or all in on defense. With the name of the item, Withering Whip, it used to be a full on disarm, which was all in on defense. That was obviously way too strong. But I would prefer that they go all in on defense rather than try to like have this weird hybrid where it gives minus bullet resist, so people buy it for that. But the defensive aspect of 45% fire rate slow for 4.5 seconds is like maybe not that great. So maybe give it something else, like maybe have it apply just like a little bit of a movement slow as well, or just like maybe something else instead of like the minus bullet resist.
Yeah,
I would prefer that.
It definitely feels a little bit like a lost its identity a little bit since it can't disarm. That they've tried to work out what it can bring to the table. Because effectively, if you took it out of the game, I think people wouldn't even notice. You know what I mean? Like it was just not in the shop. It just isn't really any build I can think of that I've used on major characters that you go, yeah, pick up Withering Whip in the same way that you'd pick up a Cold Front.
Haze is like the only character that really
Stalemates.
picks it up, and like I could see it on like Wraith too, but like any character that wants to get like solo kills early, like you could see it being picked up on. But a lot of the time, if you want to get solo kills, it feels like slowing hex is kind of like a better option because it allows you to like keep people there and they can't escape. Whereas Withering Whip is just like you'll do more damage to them and they can't really fight back for 4.5 seconds.
You'd also just return fire, right? Like, or you'd metal skin if you had the cash. If you're going up against like a Wraith or a Haze that's going to have potentially scary fire rates, like there's just better, clearer options. Bit of a
for
shame.
sure. It doesn't feel like it hard counters. But then again, I think it's probably one of those items that like you change it once or twice and then it's going to be totally fine.
Duration extender now gives 8% weapon damage, but the duration reduced from 16% to 14%. Similar, I guess, to like the range. Like duration is just handy in all sorts of different situations. Not really enough of a nerf to make it feel different, but should be trying to incentivize people in order to use it more. There's definitely just some characters like, for example, Warden, that it's going to love duration extender anyway, that this is only going to help them out.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of that change because I don't know. I don't really like throwing random stats on items that feel like they don't really make sense. Like for example, they did this with rapid recharge and I didn't like it either, which is they gave rapid recharge 12% weapon damage. And I'm just like, at this point, you're just throwing random stats on an item. Like, there's so many builds with rapid recharge, for example, that are entirely focused on spirit, that like the 12% weapon damage is basically meaningless to you. And I would say with duration extender, it's largely the same thing, depending on what you're building for. Like weapon damage is always kind of nice, but I feel like it's just kind of like a random stat that they're like, let me throw that on there. I don't really see the vision.
Yeah, I feel that overall is just the bit of the problem with the patch is just there's a lot of like murky waters of like I think with stuff like you mentioned with rapid recharge, you are going down a specific avenue to make your character stronger. The downside should be that you're making yourself really good with a charged ability, charged shot for great talent. If you want to make that stronger with your burst, with your reverb, with rapid recharge, even like reduced cooldown, 4 slots used up for your spirit, but then it might also make you weaker in some other instances. But because they've added like spirit affects your weapon damage or spirit affects your movement, you don't get a negative side of gameplay on these. Like if you just try to go all in on making one ability super strong, you should feel shit at other parts of the game. You know what I mean? But there's a lot more of like, if you get this item, it kind of nullifies you being worse at movement speed or you being a bit of a glass cannon, so to speak. That's again something that feels like hard to balance for Valve because they don't want it to just be that if you buy the melee items that you can't shoot your gun and you're not going to have any impact there. But also, if people go in hard to a specific direction of items, you should feel inhibited with the rest of your game. Like that's just good balance. Like you can. I don't really play much Path of Exile, but I know that you do. Like there, it's kind of like you pick the sort of ability that you build around, and then you get a couple of other abilities that like fill in. Like you could be super squishy, or you want to increase your movement so you're more efficient. You don't just go all in on that one item because you just get shafted by everything else. But if Path of Exile was for Valve here, you could do that and you'd still be fine with your movement speed and your squishiness. That's like my concern with balance, I suppose, but it is being maybe nitpicky at best because adding 8% weapon damage isn't going to have the whole game fall apart. You know what I mean?
It doesn't really change that much. It doesn't really change that much. I'm just like, I don't always see why you're doing this. I don't understand it. That's all.
Yeah.
But like, obviously the devs have been working on this game for a very long time. I'm sure, like probably many years, working on all the numbers and things like that. So they might have some vision or some things that I don't understand. That's fine.
Yeah, I guess it is interesting. Like, what? Like, why? Why out of everything? Why 8%? Why weapon damage? Like.
Yeah, because like people had to sit down and like have a conversation about this, like, and
surely it's not for one character either. It's not like, oh, because we saw a lot of like wardens not going into weapon damage or whatever. Like, it's like all of the information, how they work with it. Same with like bullet resist shredder. Like you get melee damage resistance, but you don't get bullet resistance anymore. Like,
yeah, I mean the fact that the item gave you bullet resistance in the first place was just kind of weird. Now it gives you melee damage resistance, which is also weird.
It's kind of like, what instance does that keep cropping up? Bullet resist shredder.
Yeah, I don't know. I would much rather that they add a defensive layer that makes it so you take less damage from enemies that are within like 5 meters or something.
Yeah, like the opposite of close quarters. Because I do like that as well for vitality items, because it's such a stat category that if you are up against a melee Shiv or an Abrams, that you can buy items that, like Metal Skin to Haze, you'd buy something that is that to Abrams. And like, it does kind of counter them a little bit, but it's taken up one of your 4 vitality slots, which can give you movement speed or armor or just other good things, right? Like, I like that side of the game of, you can counter this character, but you're using one of your 4 item slots to counter one of the 6 players.
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, it's just kind of interesting that all of these items are just getting random stats. I'm just like, okay, it's cool. It's cool that they're adding these stats. I don't really see why the stat is on this item specifically, but
yeah, it's a little bit of a roulette wheel.
It's not bad changes. It's just like, I don't really get it.
Curious,
that's fine.
Yeah. This one is easy to understand and makes sense. Like when the passive procs for Surge of Power, you no longer get slowed when shooting. Makes it like in line with other items like Fleet Foot that sort of do the same thing. But your movement speed is reduced slightly. It still provides a lot. Like seen people now just using Surge of Power to imbue spirit abilities to make them stronger. I kind of like that, like seeing it for just like the ultimate for the likes of Grey Talon, right? Movement speed based off of that isn't that impactful, especially nowadays. What other examples is there? There's somebody else I was thinking that you put it on it might be Mirage, actually, Jin's Mark. You just put it on that.
Yeah.
Because you can use it at any
you put it
point,
on
so you just get that speed boost and then the extra spirit damage on top.
Yeah. It doesn't really replace Fleetfoot, but it does allow you to have like another source of it if you don't want to build Fleetfoot. Fleetfoot gives you this passively though. They do not be slowed. So for 1250. So yeah, it kind of feels like, I mean, it's a fine change. It's an interesting change to Sugar Power.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, you could put it on. Well, you'd put it on McGinnis ult anyway. So it just kind of. I think that brings it down a little bit, right? Yeah.
It does make it more manageable, I do believe, because I don't think that McGinnis ult counts you as it doesn't count you as shooting when you're ulting, right? So it's like you're already slowed to an extent. So I think the Surge of Power did get nerfed in that aspect.
Yeah, which definitely due, yeah. Especially because they didn't really nerf much about McGinnis, and
now they just need to fix the fact that you can still use Unstoppable while using McGinnis ult. Hello, they said you couldn't use channels. They said you couldn't pop Unstoppable while channeling abilities. Why can you still do it?
Yeah. Improved reach, percentage change on both of these. We kind of already discussed improved reach of just normal reach is good enough that improving it even more seems to be less impactful, really. And I don't think this change is really going to make people jump to joy to do it. Mystic Slow, health bonus increased to 140, slow reduced from 30 to 25. I think this is kind of fair-ish. I don't think Mystic Slow was high on people's priority lists of a tier 3 item over the ones
it's
below it.
Vision of the patch. Like, it's not really, like, if you look at this change specifically, you're like, okay, kind of weird. But if you look at this change, plus the other changes, they added a little bit more slow resistance. Mystic Reverb slow was reduced. Geist slow was reduced. Overall, they're just, I think Kelvin's slow was also reduced. Overall, they're just like, reducing a bunch of slows. Like, they just don't want slows to be as annoying as they were, which is a good direction in my opinion.
Yeah. Sort of hit all of these three. The tier 3 upgrades for a lot of the tier 1s, improved burst, max HP damage increased to 9%, threshold damage increased to 200. So it does a lot more damage, but the ability itself has to be built up to a certain point. Some of these items, some of these abilities, it's going to be easier to do than others. You might need to like fully max out something in order to make it hit that mark, or get a lot more spirit in order to do it.
It's actually a huge change. A ton of characters that used to be able to proc improve burst. At first I saw it and I'm like, oh, I don't think it's a big deal, but it is actually a really big deal. Because a lot of characters that used to be able to proc improve burst, like now can like basically no longer proc it without a ton of investment. For example, I think Pocket is one of the biggest examples. Pocket could proc it with both the suitcase and his cloak. And now you actually can't if the enemy has any spirit resistance, or unless you've invested a ton. So even if you have like improved spirit and like a decent amount of spirit items, if the enemy has just like basic spirit armor, it doesn't actually proc improve burst at all on Pocket anymore.
Yeah.
Which is a huge nerf, combined with the nerf of Majestic Leap and stuff. So Pocket being hit again, but at the end of the day, I think that it's healthier. However, I think that I don't really love this change. I would prefer that improve burst have like some conditional element of the enemy's health. I would prefer that improve burst only work against enemies that are, I don't know, like above 2,500 health or something. So that's like an anti-tank item rather than a like must-buy item.
Yeah, you got Pristine Emblem for that kind of stuff, I suppose. But I think what I like about this change is it makes that identity of like poke characters a little bit more apparent. Like I'm thinking of like Yamato, Great Talon, those kind of characters that it felt like before this patch kind of fell to the wayside because sustain was such a strong aspect. Even when you had, like you said, Pocket rocking with like his cape and his satchel, that there were a lot of characters that didn't really fall into that sort of poke burst like you have that combo shown. It's the same with like Lash, but it is like a string of abilities used together to burst somebody down, as opposed to a skill shot for Yamato and Great Talon.
Mm-hmm.
That if you get hit by an arrow, it should feel like it chunks you, because that's the only thing that they bring to the table. And you also still need to build into that somewhat with Great Talon. So he's going to be weaker in some instances. Well, apparently not, because that's one of the changes that comes in. If like you stack Spirit, you get good at everything, which I don't know how I feel about that. We'll talk about that shortly. But yeah, I feel like making
we'll have time to go through all the hero changes, because I probably don't have that much more time. So we might have to cut it short on that. We might have to stop at the items, I'm not sure, and the overall meta.
We could blast through
rather
them.
than like half at. Yeah, we can go through the hero changes quickly, but I probably have like maybe like 15 more minutes.
That's fine. So superior cooldown, 150 shield, duration. It's basically making a lot of the non-imbued stuff a little bit better, but not really by much.
Yeah.
In this case, they've actually increased the duration on the imbued one too. Maybe they were just feeling that people weren't investing more into the higher levels and didn't want to buff them too much.
Yeah.
This is kind of crazy though for Ethereal Shift though. Active now grants
Ethereal Shift, big changes.
Move speeds now grants Spirit Resist. So again, it's kind of like a Warp Stone in a weird way, or like the antithesis of a Warp Stone. Now gives you Spirit Power, which is just enough of a strong reason. I saw people picking it up anyway. I think there was like a Great Talon that I saw. I keep talking about Great Talon. I've been watching like Bossy play it a lot for underdogs, and he was ridiculous. He was running around the map like a madman. But like just people are now picking up Ethereal Shift, despite there being no instances where it would become really that useful. But they've reduced like the burst aspect of it, I suppose, with like the extra Spirit Power.
Yeah, I think honestly, like the changes to Ethereal Shift make sense. Like they've been making Ethereal Shift more and more just like hey, you buy this item to help you survive things, rather than like, hey, you buy this item just because you can like dodge one ability or whatever. It's still kind of like that, but I think it has an identity that is a lot closer to Yule Scepter in Dota now, which is essentially the equivalent item. And I like the change. I don't think it feels overly strong so far. Mm-hmm. The buff duration is quite short, 5 seconds, so it's not like crazy. And overall, I think it's a move in the right direction. I think having a defensive layer like that is like Ethereal Shift felt kind of bad after the fact that you couldn't cancel it, because that was like the main reason people use it, is the fact that you could just cancel it whenever. So now they needed to make it stronger to compensate for the fact that it lost that.
Yeah, especially when there's so many good active Spirit items, even getting towards like Silence, for example, Knockdown. That's what Ethereal Shift is somewhat contesting with. So, and like you said, if you want an active item to be offensive, it should lean into offensive. Ethereal Shift should feel defensive in how it's approached. So you don't want to try to jerry-rig it to use it so you get the extra Spirit Power and then have a reload and then keep going in a fight. It should be just like a viscous cube to an extent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Improved Spirit gives you more Spirit. Can't complain about that. Same with Boundless Spirit. 65 Spirit is a crazy amount, but it is a crazy investment in order to get there. And then your weapon power is increased to 30%, which I sort of said it before, really. Like, if I'm going that hard into Spirit, I shouldn't be rewarded with extra weapon damage. Like, a little bit is fine. 30% weapon power is crazy. But then again, there are a lot of weapon items that give you a hefty amount of Spirit too. So I guess they're just trying to get people to work in that sense.
Yeah, I guess we'll see. But yeah, I mean, I think very strong. Like, Boundless Spirit is strong, especially in Great Talon. Improved Spirit got another slight buff. I think now at this point, Improved Spirit is, quite a good item. Like, I think there's been a lot of times where Improved Spirit just wasn't that good. But now that Improved Burst got nerfed for a lot of characters, Improved Spirit is looking pretty attractive.
Yeah, you want it to be to, like, if you want to get your abilities up to the level where Improved Burst works, that you're going down the route of getting more Spirit in order to do that, and that you're getting an ample amount of Spirit in order to achieve it. Which, it makes the characters strong and that you can follow that trajectory, but it makes them expensive as well, which I think is a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
again, Great Talon. You have to buy so much stuff in order to like get him up to a point where he's super scary. That you can spend like 30k souls and only have like 6 items, which is part of the problem. Like if you're going in that direction, you're not being very wide with your items. I do think we probably like leave the hero updates until the actual first episode of this. So for escalating exposure, I'm glad that it's nerfed for like per stack. Is it enough of a nerf though? Because it was an item that I don't know. Like a couple of weeks ago, it was
like twice.
The new wave. Yeah.
I mean, it was just like people just hadn't. I mean, we were in a spirit meta, and like people realized, hey, this item's completely broken, and it was. And now it's been nerfed significantly twice. So now it's at. So basically, before it was 6% per stack, and you could get 20 stacks, so you could get 120. Now it's 4%, so you can get 80. So the upper end is 80 instead of 120, which it was previously. And like before this patch specifically, it was 100 was the max spirit amp that you could get. So it's still pretty significant, right? Like in the upper, like it's a 20% nerf. You know, when you say it like that, it sounds a lot more impactful than like, oh, it's just from 5 to 4%.
Yeah. And especially with there being, throughout that period, there was less spirit resistance, but now there's a lot more. There's still more bullet resistance, I think, in the game overall. And
I don't think that there's actually that much. There's not actually that much more spirit resistance. I'm pretty sure the only actual source of spirit resistance that was like added without just like trading is a Titanic mag. I'm pretty sure that was the only source of spirit resistance that was added. Other than that, it was all trades. Like Phantom Strike and Unstoppable, I'm pretty sure were just like swapped. So like that wasn't like. So I think the only thing that was added is. I
mean, you get it for Ethereal Shift as well, but like that's a conditional. So that's guess true. It doesn't really count.
Ethereal Shift is like for 5 seconds, so I don't really count it that much. But other than that, like I'm looking at it right now, and there's still, there's still not a lot of sources.
Is there more melee resistance in the game now that you can get than spirit resistance?
Oh no, there's not. Not
quite close. There yet.
There's only 2 melee resist items, which are Bullet Resist Shredder and Titanic Mag. But for Spirit Resist, there's Healing Booster, Spirit Armor, Restorative Locket, Mystic Vuln, Cold Front. So that's already 5. And then Pristine Emblem, Titanic Mag, so you're at 7. Ethereal Shift, if you want to count it. I'm not going to count it though, because it's like very conditional. So you're at 7, and then you've got Colossus, which is also conditional, so we're not going to count that. Phantom Strike, which is not conditional, so 8. And I guess you could count Escalating Exposure, but Escalating Exposure is kind of an upgrade, so I'm not going to count it. And then 9 for Mystic Reverb, and 10 with Fresher. So there's 10 sources of Spirit Resist. And as far as, and this is without counting the upgrades, right? If there's an upgrade, I just counted it as one source. For example, Spirit Armor, even though there's improved Spirit Armor, that's still just one source. As far as Bullet Resist, you've got Berserker, you've got, there's Berserker, there's, I guess, Escalating Resilience is kind of hard. Like, should you count it? Should you not count it? But let's say we don't count it. There's Restorative Shot, Mystic Reach, Berserker, so we're already at 3, Bullet Armor 4, then there's Point Blank 5, Life Strike 6, then there is Siphon Bullet 7, Echo Shard 8, Refresher 9, and Unstoppable 10. Wait, there's actually the exact same amount of so now there's the exact same amount if you don't consider active or like conditional. Bullet Resist, there are more conditional because there's Warpstone, there's Escalating Resilience, etc. But in terms of non-active, there's actually the exact same amount of sources of Bullet Resist and Spirit Resist in the game right now.
Okay.
There used to be a huge disparity.
Yeah. Especially after like the last patch, they shifted. Because it felt like the problem that they had and that they wanted to avoid is a lot of the spirit-centric characters that should have like poor weaponry were being built as weapon damage characters, like Gun Kelvin, Gun Viscous. Great Talon is another like example from like basically whatever Listic's doing. Listic seems to be doing it at the moment. So it did feel that there was a bit of a problem for Valve to get people to build spirit-centric characters, and less into guns. So they wanted to, and then you just go for like gun builds on everybody. So Haze and Wraith were super strong too in that capacity. So there's more bullet resistance available, but there's less spirit resistance. So you build in that direction. But they have, like, not to mention too much about like the characters, because we can do that like later in the week. Like you've got more examples of like Greytown was the first to do it. Somebody else, it was Bebop actually from this recent patch, like spirit power damage scaling like up on it and like increasing weapon damage as an effect, right? Like there's a lot more. If you increase spirit, it increases your weapon damage too, which is curious to see what direction that kind of goes in, because stuff like for Bebop with the sticky bomb changes, I kind of like it, but like it does make the changes just make his gun and ult builds even stronger, which might make him actually competitive at like the higher level. Because outside of like using him as a support for a lot of teams or just Warlex doing Warlex things, there's not many players that are actively touching the likes of Bebop, because you want to build him weapon, but he should be predominantly based around spirit, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then same with Great Talon.
It's definitely an interesting thing. I think that what Valve wants is that at the end of the day that there are multiple builds viable for every character, which I think is a very, very like noble and interesting way to approach the game, and is one of the things that I really like. For example, I think on Lash right now there are multiple ways to build Lash, and I think that they all can work. And I think that this is true for example, for Shiv. For a lot of characters, it's like, hey, you know, this build is really good, but also like this build's also quite good. Like for Shiv, you can build him weapon, you can build him knife, like he's still very playable. The melee build's not like completely dead, although it is significantly worse. So I think for Valve, their vision is always like, hey, we want multiple builds to be viable on any character, but it's obviously very hard to balance characters that way. But like they've definitely achieved that for a few characters at the very least. So
yeah, I guess because we focused a lot on the items. Are there any items that you think are worth people looking into more? Because some of the naturally, a lot of the items we haven't spoken about because they haven't been changed. So what items weren't in the patch notes that you were surprised at because they weren't there? I have a buff on there.
I would say, yeah. I think that honestly, I think Echo Shard is still like incredibly powerful. And I'm honestly kind of like surprised that it hasn't been touched. Like it feels kind of insane to me. So Echo Shard, the concept of Echo Shard is just so strong, and I feel like it's one of those items that's just like always going to be like really strong, especially with like new characters coming out. For example, like right now in Hero Labs you have Magician, right? And everybody remembers when Mirage came out, first game
Echo Shard Tornado, yeah.
I went to Echo Shard Tornado, and it's just like, okay, you're stunned for like 4 seconds, you can't play you can't really play the game. Of course there are counters to it, but with Magician, he's got a Hex. Echo Shard is going to be broken on him. I already played Echo Shard Magician. It's a broken, I can tell you, and they might change it. But I think Echo Shard is just like such a good item for so many characters. Like, it's not every character that can abuse it, but there are enough that can abuse it. Like McGinnis double wall is insanely strong. Vindicta double tether is very strong.
7
Warden
stun
double
previously.
cage can honestly work too. 7 stun can still work. McGinnis can also get like 2 heal stations and things like that. Mirage can still abuse it with Tornado. Paradox can now abuse it with her nade build. And it just like, I think it's probably still a little bit too strong of an item, because there's always going to be situations that come up in which it's going to be like, okay, like this thing is broken, and therefore Echo Shard will just make it way more broken.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same as...
Bullets also is probably problematic, but we'll see.
It's the same as what I was saying before, of like, with like items like Refresher, incredibly strong still for it, just being able to reset abilities and ult, but you only get like spirit resistance and bullet resistance, and it's not even that much, because the item in itself should be the reason that you're spending 6.2k on it. Like, you shouldn't get anything else other than what Refresher is. And I think the fact that Echo Shard,
you get quite a bit of resist, like
like you get 16% bullet resistance on Echo Shard and 12 spirit power. Like, why the fuck are you getting that much spirit power on an item that's already this strong? You know what I mean?
1 meter per second movement speed too, just for the good measure.
Yeah, it's just like Magic Carpet. I can understand a little bit more, because it is such a weird ability that you might want to add some like ability duration and stuff on it. But like curse giving you 20% weapon damage, it's like if you're putting that much money into it, it should be to just have a very specific reason in mind. Because there's some of these items that's like you might just want to buy curse just in case, realistically. But,
I mean, one thing that maybe they should consider, I mean, I guess we'll see, but they have dropped the prices of items significantly multiple times. Like, for example, the 6,200 items used to be actually 6,500 back in May, and they've dropped the prices multiple times. So they brought it to like 64 and then 63 and then now 62. So maybe they might, drop them a little bit more and make it so it gives less stats, but, you're buying them a little bit more for the actives. I'm not sure. I do kind of agree with you that sometimes like a lot of these items are kind of like really powerful actives and then they're also like stat sticks, which feels a little weird, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's trying to think of what the best examples used to be, because there was an item that's in the back of my mind that was very much this just gives me so much, why would I ever go for anything else? But like with stuff like crippling headshot, like these kind of like extra little things, because it is weapon damage, it is lifesteal, like it's enough of a thing to make the passive strong enough, but the extra stats that you get on it at least makes sense. Like Ricochet giving more ammo.
Well, like crippling headshot used to be the item though, because crippling headshot used to give you more lifesteal. It would give you more weapon damage, and on top of that, it also used to be 35% minus 35% bullet and spirit resist instead of like what it is now.
Yeah.
So it used to be that item. It used to be that. There's also other items like let me think. There was, which was it? Can't remember off the top of my head. I mean, siphon bullets, when it used to be like a weapon item, would give you the on-hit effect and would also give you like an insane amount of weapon damage, like 40% or something. Even though it already gave you like the plus on hit, and like it was super broken back then. Like I would just buy it on gun shiv all the time and like be literally melting people.
Yeah. Like Divine Barrier, just the ability range is just like, why does it need that? Like, if you want to increase the range of Divine Barrier, just increase the range of that, Like, it just feels that some items give you stuff, they give you so much already, but they give you extra on top, which, I don't know. Like, if you're spending money on the items, you should be limited in other areas, for sure. And then you've got stuff like Wither and Whip, which doesn't feel like it provides as much, if not anything, in comparison. Yeah, like some of the extra bits and pieces that you get on some of these items, for me, just feel like a little bit like win more kind of situations almost.
Yeah, for sure. An interesting design decision.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much all we have time for then. I think it'd be curious to sort of see, like, obviously doing these kind of things like right after a patch is good to see people's general reactions, but certainly with some of the changes to heroes, I'm kind of like open to just waiting a couple of days to see what happens anyhow, because like Vindicta could be amazing, could be overrated. It's still early days yet, but there's definitely a lot of people that's putting big stock into her for sure. So
yeah, for sure. I think in general, like, that's why my meta report series that I do usually waits like a couple days after the patch. I don't do it right away because, we don't really know what the meta is going to be right away. And so usually like I do it like 4 to 5 days after the patch so that we have had time, usually in the weekend. Sometimes there's been a tournament and like we see kind of how it develops and, but yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I think we can definitely do multiple, and we can also just like, we probably don't need to like, read through like every change as well. I'm not really sure if that's going to be beneficial. I think a lot of like the number changes or whatever can probably just be like, hey, they added just a bunch of numbers. If you want the full patch notes, you can go to the website. But like, there was obviously like a lot of interesting meta stuff to talk about at the beginning as well.
Yeah.
Which, I think is important to cover. But yeah.
Yeah, I think it's also like, 'cause it's the first time that we have to kind of gloss for everything almost. But good to sort of set the ground rules, because naturally these kind of things tend to be quite long anyhow, but you don't want it to be like 4 hours of people talking about patch notes. We're not Purge. We can't do that. We shouldn't be doing that.
Purge is like 10 hours.
Yeah, like rookie numbers in comparison. But yeah, that's it. Like, I don't know whether this will go out just on YouTube as like a cut video, but if you've watched it this far, for people who are watching it live and also not, like, thanks for watching. Still need a name. I think people said like Lock Talk. Don't know how I feel about that. I think we could do better, but I think it's been fun to just maths club about this, and because it just doesn't feel like we get people talking about like the nitty gritty side of it and sort of thinking about whether it's going to be good.
I think a lot of these discussions happen in private between like high level players or whatever. Like I have discussions with teammates all the time about different patch notes, or with Boink, or whoever is talking to me at that time. But it's pretty rare that these thoughts kind of make it out to the public, because a lot of the time they're not like fleshed out enough to be like a video where I can be like, hey, here's definitively what I think about this or what's going to happen. But yeah
and it's a shame that we couldn't really talk about the patch that came out here today, but considering this patch had just a lot in it, I kind of like everything I saw in the patch last night. I was like, I'm very happy that they're actually putting this stuff in or changing this stuff. Like, I think Valve are doing a really good job with like balancing the game and like the cadence of patches. Sometimes it's just like, I think they try to put too much into one patch, and it kind of, you can't really tell the wood through the trees almost. The woods from the trees, sorry. Because there's just so much in there that it's hard to know if a character's OP or whether it's an item or whether it's just the fact that its counters are weaker, therefore it is stronger.
Yeah, some things look good on paper, and then when you play them out, it doesn't feel the same. Like the Walker changes, for example, looked good on paper to me, but then when I played them, I'm like, oh, I don't know if I'm a big fan of this.
Yeah.
Actually, so yeah, that's just. But yeah, I agree that basically it's hard to know these things. I think it's still fun to talk about it in theory craft, and like, if the patches, honestly, I firmly believe that if the patches were every 4 weeks instead of every 2 weeks, that we would find even more stuff that's broken that we hadn't found.
Yeah.
I don't think everything that's broken in a patch gets really discovered. I think that there are usually things that are kind of like underrated always and not really utilized that in the meta that would be discovered if the patch rotation was longer. I'm not advocating. I think 2 weeks is perfect for the state the game's in, but I think that there's always things that are not discovered.
Yeah, I mean, I like 2 weeks. I mean, that's what Riot keeps to. I just wouldn't want Overwatch patches where they're just once in a blue moon on random days at any good point. Yeah, it's a good old time. Speaking of which, Boink is here just to end it, but we're ending whatever this is. And we'll see you in the next one. So thank you very much for watching. You gotta wave, right. Deathy. You gotta wave to the fake people.
Goodbye. I don't know if it's cut.